Welcome to Public Speaking Confidence, Techniques to Speak with Impact, brought to you by Mindful Literary. This book is designed to transform your fear of public speaking into a powerful tool for connection and influence. Whether you're a novice speaker or looking to refine your skills, this guide offers practical techniques, personal anecdotes, and insightful strategies to help you speak with confidence and leave a lasting impact on your audience. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The first step, embracing the fear. Recognizing the symptoms of fear. Fear, I've come to learn, can be an overwhelming shadow that cloaks moments ripe with potential. For many, including myself, public speaking carries this insidious weight. It's ironic, really. Standing up to speak to a group can expose fears that run deeper than the immediate sweat on our palms or the flutter of our hearts. I can still remember my first time. The room was packed, faces eager yet unrecognizable. It felt as though all eyes were trained on me, ready to dissect every flaw. And that's when the symptoms washed over me. I stood there, frozen, my hands trembling like leaves caught in a fierce autumn wind. It was a distinct sensation, my palms slick, as if someone had poured a bucket of water right on them. I could feel the perspiration making a slow, treacherous journey down my back, each droplet a reminder of my nervousness. It was in that moment of humiliation that I recognized these symptoms, the signs of fear emerging in full force. They weren't mere inconveniences. They were visceral reactions to anxiety, shouting at me to take notice. Over the years, I've learned to identify them, and in doing so, I've found solace, not in the fear itself, but in acknowledging its presence. The throat tightening, the racing heartbeat, the fleeting thoughts of escape, all these responses are remarkably common. It helps to understand that I'm not alone in this. Many who step into the spotlight share this plight, their own insecurities manifesting in similar ways. By embracing these feelings, rather than shoving them aside, I discovered a sense of control over my fears that I hadn't anticipated. I learned to breathe through it, allowing vulnerability to coexist with the courage to speak. Acknowledging fear is the first step in the journey to mastery, and it's a journey worth taking. But that wasn't the end of my struggles, it was merely the beginning. There were times when fear wrapped around my throat like a vice, moments when the last vestiges of confidence evaporated, leaving behind a shivering husk of the person I could be. Each experience in front of an audience began to feel like an ultimatum. Either I could let fear dictate my narrative, or I could take the pen back into my own hands. A pivotal moment came when I faced an audience that seemed to pulse with a palpable energy. They were there to support me, yet all I could focus on were the beads of sweat forming on my brow, the quiver in my voice betraying my bravado. It was in that climax, teetering on the edge of a panic attack, heart racing, thoughts spiraling, that I made a choice. I could either succumb to the fear and retreat or embrace the chaos and push through. I took a deep breath, acknowledged the fear, and allowed it to be part of my experience. In that surrender, I found my voice, steadied my hands, and transformed what could have been a crippling setback into a powerful reclamation of self. As you navigate your own fears, remember the importance of recognition. The next time you feel that familiar rush of anxiety before speaking, know that it is not the enemy. It is a natural response, a symptom of being alive and engaged with the world around you. Each tremor, each bead of sweat is a testament to your humanity. So stand firm when fear tries to grip you, acknowledge it, breathe, and know that you are not alone in this journey. The path toward conquering the fear of public speaking is paved with these very moments. Embrace them, and you may just find that fear is not the end, but the beginning of something extraordinary. My first speech, a humbling experience. Public speaking was never on my list of favorite activities. In fact, I would rather have presented a science project to the class while balancing a textbook on my head than face the daunting prospect of addressing my classmates. Yet, at the cusp of high school, I found myself standing alongside friends, all of us eagerly waiting for our names to be called for speech day. My heart raced like a hummingbird, a chaotic mix of excitement and terror. "You'll do great," my friend Emily said, her eyes sparkling with encouragement. Yet somehow, her words felt like a heavy stone. As the microphone was passed to me, I felt that familiar mix of adrenaline rush and sheer dread washing over me. The moment I stepped in front of the crowd, the world seemed to blur around me. Faces turned into a melting soup of features, their whispers fading into a distant hum. My notes were firmly gripped in my hands, the words I had practiced relentlessly now morphing into an indecipherable code. "Good afternoon," I began, the sound of my voice echoing oddly in the auditorium. But halfway through my introduction, something strange happened. A blank slate took residence in my mind as I froze mid-sentence, the words escaping me like slippery fish. Panic seized me, and I stood there, paralyzed, my mouth moving but no sound emerging. The heat of embarrassment flushed through me, a wave that felt like a hot spring rushing over my entire body. The silence elongated, stretching painfully in those fleeting seconds, each moment heavier than the last. I could feel my classmates' gazes boring into me, some whispering, others barely containing chuckles. My neatly structured talk about the wonders of science fair projects faded away, swallowed by a tidal wave of anxiety. The irony was not lost on me. The very thing I hoped to share with my classmates had entrapped me in my fears. It was a humbling moment that I would not soon forget, and in that instant, I experienced a surge of vulnerability I had never anticipated. What went wrong? Why had I let my nerves seize such control over my thoughts? I left the podium feeling defeated, the giggles and snickers still ringing in my ears. But as the days turned into weeks, I began to reflect deeply on that day. What I realized was not just the shame of freezing, but the insight I gained from the experience. My speech had been a feature of my fears, but it also illuminated my resilience. I learned that bravery isn't devoid of fear. Rather, it coexists with it. When I got home that day, I looked in the mirror, reminding myself that everyone stumbles at times. I found the strength to continue practicing speaking, whether in front of friends, family, or even just my reflection. Each practice session chipped away at the anxiety and rebuilt my confidence piece by piece. Resilience became the cornerstone of my growth. Instead of shying away from speaking opportunities, I began seeking them out. I enrolled in a public speaking club where each speech was met not with judgment but with support and constructive criticism. The members, just like me, were navigating their own fears and insecurities. Gradually, I transformed that same podium where I once stood petrified into a platform where my voice could be heard. What initially felt like a complete failure blossomed into a stepping stone towards something greater. My first speech may have been a humbling experience, but it marked the beginning of my journey towards mastery. From that day forward, I understood that failure was a necessary part of growth, a chapter that would ultimately lead to my evolution as a speaker. Now, when I glance back, I see my first speech not just as a moment of embarrassment, but as a launching point. It taught me that the heart of vulnerability doesn't weaken, but rather strengthens our resolve. We don't get to choose the lessons life throws at us, but through each stumble, we are presented with opportunities to rise again. The next time I approach a podium, nerves gently fluttering in my stomach, I'll remember that day and smile at how far I've come, knowing that every experience brings us closer to our true potential. The journey of growth never ceases, and it all begins with a moment that feels like the end. The power of acknowledgement. Standing in front of a crowd, my heartbeat thudded like a drum, echoing in my ears. I could almost hear the thoughts racing through the audience as if they were a roaring river, filled with doubts, expectations, and perhaps a hint of skepticism. I understood all too well the insecurities that shrouded my existence, those nagging voices that whispered I wasn't enough. Yet at that moment, I realized that I wasn't the only one contending with unvoiced fears. I could sense it, an undercurrent of discomfort rippling through the seats, and therein lay the crux of it all. Acknowledging those insecurities was both an act of bravery and a gateway to authenticity. As I breathed in slowly, pondering how to connect, it struck me that the most meaningful interactions were built upon recognition. Acknowledgement was not merely a nod to my vulnerabilities, but an invitation to the audience to bring their own feelings to the forefront. I could almost visualize the invisible wall that often separated speakers from their listeners crashing down, replaced by the warm, inviting glow of empathy and understanding. This was my truth. when we recognize and validate the emotions swirling around us, both speaker and audience are given permission to engage wholeheartedly. That day in front of the crowd marked a pivotal moment in my journey, a lesson learned in the alchemy of vulnerability. In that chaotic swirl of nerves and expectations, I began to weave through my presentation with a new awareness. I found myself reflecting not just on what I wanted to say, but also on how the unfolding emotions around me could shape the conversation we were sharing. My words became a mirror for the audience's unspoken feelings. I know this topic can bring up some tough emotions, I confessed, my voice steady yet gentle, carrying a warmth that embraced the crowd. Let's acknowledge those together. In that instant, the tension seemed to dissolve, replaced by an eagerness to connect. A ripple of understanding spread across the room, and I could feel a renewed energy pulsing through the air. This mutual acknowledgement was, in essence, a pact of authenticity, an unspoken agreement to be real, to be heard, and to embrace the discomfort in our shared experiences. Yet, as the session progressed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something deeper was at play. Each anecdote I shared resonated with a lightness, a shared laughter here, a few nods of understanding there, but there lingered an unarticulated heaviness beneath the surface. As I approached the concluding remarks, I sensed a shift. The audience seemed poised on the edge of a precipice, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. It was then I knew that a simple acknowledgement wasn't sufficient. It was time for a reckoning. "I can't promise this journey will be easy," I said, my voice lowering to a more intimate timbre, urging silence. "But if we can sit with our discomfort, we unlock the potential for real transformation. Together, we can navigate this path." With every word, I felt the weight of shared vulnerabilities press uncomfortably against me. The room was alive with emotional acknowledgement, and I could see the audience stirring, ready to confront the raw truths faced by many of us but seldom admitted. I was aware that my journey as a speaker was inherently tethered to that very moment. Fear and bravery collided, filling the space with an electricity that was palpable. It dawned upon me that true connection often requires dredging up uncomfortable feelings, both mine and theirs. We were all co-authors in this narrative, and only through acknowledgement could we write it together. Each shared truth built a bridge toward authenticity, inviting the audience to take that leap alongside me. Chapter 2: Building Your Foundation, the Importance of Preparation. Researching your topic, the key to confidence. There's something magical about turning the fear of speaking into the euphoria of sharing knowledge. I can recall a time when the mere thought of presenting in front of an audience sent shivers down my spine. I was the quintessential anxious speaker, drenched in sweat and plagued with self-doubt. But through extensive research, I discovered a method that transformed my anxiety into authority, allowing me to stand confidently in front of others and share what I loved. Diving deep into my subjects shifted my perspective. I found that knowledge breeds confidence. When I understood the nuances of a topic, whether it was the intricacies of climate change or the evolution of jazz music, I felt empowered. I wasn't just parroting information. I was engaged and involved in a conversation. My audience could sense this shift. My passion became palpable as I spoke, replacing any trace of fear with authority. Through research, I also honed my ability to address questions spontaneously, as I had a treasure trove of information at my fingertips, ready to share. So how did I get there? I learned to conduct effective research by honing in on credible sources. I relied heavily on academic journals, reputable websites, and expert interviews. The internet can be a murky pond, full of misinformation, so I became adept at distinguishing between fact and fiction. I found that public libraries could be a goldmine of reliable resources, and I immersed myself in texts that challenged my thinking. I even saved bookmarks and compiled notes, actions that seemed tedious at the time, but ended up being invaluable tools when I delved into discussions or presentations. Preparation was key. I practiced integrating my research into my talks, ensuring it flowed naturally rather than feeling forced or stilted. My early experiments resembled clumsy improvisations, but with time, I began to weave information seamlessly into my narratives. It was as if each statistic, anecdote, or concept had a place in my story, allowing me to speak with warmth and clarity. And more importantly, it lessened the rising tide of nerves that crept in before I faced an audience. By committing to thorough research, I turned an overwhelming responsibility into a manageable, even delightful process. I discovered exhilarating facts, unexpected connections, and the thrill of enlightening others. Each presentation became a celebration of ideas rather than a trial by fire. Yet, I still remember the moments before stepping onto that stage, the heart-racing anticipation and doubts sneaking in like uninvited guests. As I prepared for what seemed like my biggest presentation yet, my cheat sheet sprawled on the table, barely containing my nervous energy. I couldn't shake the thoughts running through my head. What if I forgot a key point? What if someone challenged my conclusions? These thoughts underscored the importance of my research. Nearly every line on that sheet was crafted from nights of diligence and study. But right then, I realized that it wasn't just about facts, it was about connection. Connecting my insights to the audience's understanding, making them feel included in the journey of discovery. In that moment, the tension reached a peak. I took a deep breath, looked over my notes one last time, and made a silent promise to myself. I would share, not just inform. As I stepped onto the stage, every word I'd researched became a building block of confidence beneath my feet. My heart raced, but now it was a drumbeat, urging me forward into the spotlight, ready to transform anxiety into a moment of shared knowledge and passion. Structuring your speech effectively. As I stood before the audience, my heart raced. The lights flooded the room, illuminating eager faces that awaited my words. I had prepared extensively, but what resonated most with me was the structure of my speech. Looking back on my experiences, I realized that organizing content into the classic framework of beginning, middle, and end not only eased the delivery process, but transformed an ordinary talk into something extraordinary. At the heart of any speech lies a narrative that captivates the audience. The beginning sets the stage and captures attention. Think of it as the hook that draws listeners in. I remember the first time I applied this principle. I opened with a personal anecdote about my childhood struggles with public speaking. Instantly, I felt a connection form, a wave of empathy washing over the audience. They were not just there for information. They were there to relate, to understand. This experience taught me that a strong opening can make or break your speech. Then comes the middle. This is where the bulk of your content resides, and it's imperative to keep the tension building. It's easy to lose momentum here, but I found that interspersing stories, data, and humor maintained engagement. I reflected on the presentations I had sat through that either lulled me to sleep or kept me perched at the edge of my seat. For a recent talk I gave on innovation, I shared a gripping case study, detailing a startup's journey from failure to remarkable success. Each twist and turn in the story kept the audience's eyes glued to me. Nobody was looking at their phones. By the time I reached the end of the middle portion, everyone was invested, hanging on my every word. Finally, we arrive at the end, where the challenge is not just to summarize, but to leave a lasting impression. I learned that a powerful conclusion should echo the themes of the speech and provide a clear call to action. I once ended a talk with a thought-provoking question that lingered in the air long after I stepped off the stage. What will you do tomorrow to change the narrative of your life? That moment transformed my message from mere words into a challenge, inspiring reflection and action. In structuring the speech effectively, I didn't just talk at them. I engaged them in a conversation that was poised to resonate beyond the confines of the podium. So, as you embark on your own journey of speech writing, remember the structure: a captivating beginning, a compelling middle, and a thought-provoking end. With each step thoughtfully crafted, you will find that creating a speech outline not only eases the delivery process, but ensures your audience feels informed and, most importantly, engaged. As the lights dim and you prepare to face your own audience, channel those fears and excitement into the art of storytelling. And watch as your words forge a connection that readers will carry with them long after your speech has ended. Practice makes perfect. My journey. When I first decided to improve my speaking skills, I had no idea what embarking on this journey would entail. Each day began with the same ritual. I would stand in front of my mirror, full of questions and doubts, staring at my own reflection with an anticipation that often turned into anxiety. It was a strange sensation, talking to myself, but I quickly learned to embrace the awkwardness. The mirror became my silent partner, offering no judgment other than the way my words echoed back at me. I practiced everything from mundane introductions to passionate speeches, all while meticulously observing the slightest changes in my gestures and facial expressions. As the days turned into weeks, my friends became my audience, and each gathering transformed into a mini stage. "Can you listen to my speech?" I would ask, feeling vulnerable but eager for their feedback. Initially, they laughed and teased me about being overly dramatic, but as I refined my approach, their laughter turned into genuine applause. I recall one evening vividly. It was a spontaneous gathering, and somehow I ended up sharing my progress with them. As I spoke, I noticed their faces, some intrigued, others clearly bored. The split-second realization that I could hold attention, or lose it entirely, was both terrifying and thrilling. I felt the tension build as I adjusted my tone and pace, determined to keep them engaged. The importance of rehearsal was sinking in, and I could feel my confidence swell with every practiced word. Then came the hardest critic of all, my cat, Whiskers. Yes, you read that right. With her, it was a different kind of practice. There's something oddly humbling about performing for a creature who could not care less. I would sit on my living room floor, passionately delivering lines to her as she stared blankly, or worse, turned away. Is this where my speaking journey has led me? I'd think, laughing at the absurdity of it all. But in those moments, as Whiskers lay sprawled at my feet, I learned a vital lesson. Perfection does not stem from performing for praise, but from the unyielding commitment to improve. Speaking to the cat, I learned to control my nerves, to find rhythm in my words, and to love the process of speaking itself. Each of these experiences emphasizes a critical truth. Practice is not merely a repetition of the same lines. It's an iterative journey where improvement is incremental yet profound. For anyone looking to hone their speaking skills, I can suggest a few practical approaches, a combination that worked wonders for me. First, create a routine. Carve out a dedicated time each day. Make it sacred. Second, don't shy away from your mirror. It's your first audience. Record yourself and listen back. It's cringeworthy at first, but so enlightening. Lastly, find someone willing to be your sounding board, whether it's friends, family, or even pets. Each critique and each nod of approval is a step closer to your goal. Yet, just as I felt I was getting the hang of it, a sudden crush of anxiety tightened around my chest like a vice. The upcoming community event loomed over me, a chance to showcase my progress. My preparations became frantic, fueled by both excitement and nails-on-a-chalkboard dread. Would it all pay off? Would my hard work resonate? And in that crowded room, would I lose myself in the sea of faces eager to hear? As the event neared, hours spent in front of the mirror, challenges faced in jest with my friends, and those humbling sessions with Whiskers played like an endless reel in my mind. Would practice really make perfect, or was I still just a work in progress? Chapter 3. Understanding Your Audience. The Heart of Connection. Who am I speaking to? As I sat in front of my laptop, fingers poised above the keyboard, I realized that the most crucial question I had to answer wasn't about what I wanted to say, but rather who I was speaking to. I often rushed into drafting pieces, filled with excitement, only to later discover that my words resonated with a different audience than I had intended. It was a revelation that changed everything. Effective communication, I learned, hinges on understanding the audience's preferences, interests, and perhaps most importantly, their expectations. During my initial forays into writing, I often wrote for myself, which felt liberating. I shared thoughts that were important to me, without a second thought about whether anyone would relate. But as the feedback rolled in, some enthusiastic, some tepid, it became clear that not everyone felt the connection I felt with my words. I remember a particularly humbling moment when a reader commented on a piece I had poured my heart into. They appreciated the artistry, but it completely missed the mark on pertinence. That was my awakening. I started to realize the necessity of adapting my content to meet diverse needs. One memorable instance of adapting my approach occurred when I conducted an online workshop on writing for different mediums. I assumed my audience would be aspiring novelists, eager to delve into the intricacies of character development. However, when the session began, I quickly recognized a mix of bloggers, journalists, and business writers among the participants. The energy in the virtual room suggested they craved practical insights applicable to their unique writing journeys. I pivoted my content on the fly, sharing techniques relevant to their interests, how to capture attention in a blog post versus sustaining suspense in a novel. By the end of the session, the feedback was overwhelmingly positive, affirming the importance of context in communication. But adapting wasn't just about content, it was about recognizing my audience's emotional landscape. Each time I write, I remember that behind every comment, every critique, there's a person with their own experiences and expectations. I strive to connect on that level, speaking to their hopes, dreams, and frustrations. It goes beyond the written word. It's a conversation. And as every good conversation entails knowing when to listen, I began diligently collecting feedback and truly valuing it. It's not just data, it's a pulse check on the connection I strive to foster. In a deeper sense, I began to see writing as a relationship, sometimes tumultuous, often enlightening. Yet, the turning point for me was when I found courage in vulnerability, sharing my struggles with the writing process and inviting my audience to share theirs. It created an atmosphere of authenticity that encouraged engagement and dialogue, reifying my understanding of who I was really speaking to. The fear of misunderstanding transformed into an eagerness to foster genuine connections. But here's where the tension begins to rise. Just as I thought I had a handle on my audience, I was faced with a new challenge, a shifting landscape of expectations amid a rapidly changing world. One day, I launched a piece aimed at exploring the emotional resilience of writers during difficult times. I was excited about the insights I believed would resonate well, but the feedback I received was a jarring reminder that not everyone was on the same page. Some found it uplifting, while others felt it didn't address their immediate struggles. This divergence made me question my foundation yet again. Who was I truly speaking to? And did I have the skill to adapt once more? The reality is that understanding one's audience is not a one-time endeavor. It's an ongoing journey rife with twists and revelations that keep us on our toes. As I grapple with this reality, I find myself at a crossroads, aware that the ability to connect and resonate hinges largely on flexibility and intent. The stakes have never felt higher. What might I uncover about my audience next? What uncharted territory lies ahead in my understanding of them? And as I prepare for this next step, I can't help but feel the thrilling weight of potential failure and success breathing down my neck. Tailoring your message. One size does not fit all. As someone who has spent countless hours standing before diverse audiences, I've learned one unshakable truth: the importance of tailoring your message. You might think that once you've honed your speech, it should work for anyone, anywhere, at any time. But I assure you, nothing could be further from the truth. Just as a tailor carefully measures a client's dimensions to create a perfectly fitting suit, effective communicators must also adjust their speech to suit the unique characteristics of their audience. By understanding this concept, we can enhance our connection and leave a lasting impact. I recall a pivotal moment during my early speaking career when I had the opportunity to address a group of school children. It was a vibrant sea of youthful faces, bubbling with energy and curiosity. In my preparation, I quickly realized that the language I usually employed in professional settings would likely soar over their heads like a kite tangled in the breeze. I dove deep into my bag of tricks, pulling out anecdotes that would resonate with their world. A story about a day spent in a treehouse, pretending to be an astronaut. Instantly, I witnessed their eyes light up. In that moment, I understood that engaging children requires a playful tone, vivid imagery, and relatable concepts. The language shifted from formal jargon to exciting adventures, breaking down barriers and fostering authentic connection. Fast forward a few years, and I found myself stepping into a boardroom filled with seasoned professionals. The atmosphere was thick with expectations. They had come to absorb insights that would propel their businesses forward. Gone were the whimsical tales of treehouses and imaginary flights to other galaxies. Instead, I leaned into data, real-world applications of theories, and language that spoke to their ambitions and challenges. Smooth transitions between statistics and case studies allowed me to maintain a professional tone while keeping the conversation engaging. That day, I felt the intricate dance between speaker and audience come alive in every nod and thoughtful smile. However, just as I was beginning to feel comfortable, doubt crept in. What if they deemed my approach too casual? Would they take me seriously? This tension propelled me to deepen my engagement further, utilizing their feedback as fuel for adaptation. I was at the precipice, waiting to see if my tailored message would take flight or crash to the ground. Ultimately, the key lies not only in understanding your audience's demographics, but in connecting with their foundational interests and challenges. When we make the choice to engage authentically with the motivations and expectations of others, our message transcends mere words. It becomes a bridge, facilitating genuine human connection. This journey of connection, whether with children at a primary school or executives at a conference, illuminates the extraordinary potential of tailored messaging. As I left that boardroom, high on success but humbled by the experience, I realized that this delicate process involves a continuous cycle of learning, adapting, and growing. Each audience brings a unique rhythm that we must endeavor to understand. And while that day had ended in triumph, a new tension surfaced within me. Who will my audience be next time? And how can I craft a message that fits them just right? The impact of empathy on public speaking. It was a brisk September day when I stood backstage at a crowded auditorium, my heart pounding to the rhythm of the anxious audience beyond the curtain. As I adjusted my tie in the mirror, I caught a glimpse of the crowd's eager faces, a blend of hope, anxiety, and curiosity. In that moment, I realized that what I needed most wasn't just a well-crafted speech. It was empathy. The ability to put myself in their shoes was the secret ingredient to transforming a mundane talk into a connection that mattered. Empathy isn't just a buzzword, it's the lifeblood of effective communication. I remember my first public speaking engagement, a college class where I was terrified to share my essay on environmental issues. I could see the disinterest in a few of my classmates' eyes, some even yawning. But then, I noticed a friend in the front row, visibly concerned about climate change. It dawned on me that my fear was shared. I pivoted my speech, speaking directly to the worries I knew she harbored. It created a ripple effect, a moment of realization that I wasn't just a speaker relaying information. I was representing a voice for the audience, a much-needed perspective that enhanced engagement. As I grew more experienced and encountered a wider variety of audiences, I learned to actively listen, to watch how people reacted to my words. One memorable occasion was during a workshop for business owners adapting to changes in technology. Early in the session, I sensed unease, eyes darting, fidgeting hands, and downturned faces. They were scared of the unknown. Acknowledging that fear was my first step, I shared my own story of anxiety when my small business faced the digital wave. I opened up about sleepless nights spent worrying whether I'd be relevant. That vulnerability bridged the gap between us. Suddenly, we were allies facing the same battlefield. The result? By the end of the workshop, I had fostered a room full of open conversation, actionable strategies, and trusting relationships. The power of empathy in public speaking is not merely an emotional tool. It's practical too. When my audience felt my understanding of their challenges, they became invested in the conversation. Feedback poured in afterward, not just critiques of my delivery, but heartfelt messages about how my stories impacted their perspectives. One woman told me, "You spoke the language of fear that I couldn't put into words." That evening, I learned that empathy creates a safe space. It empowers others to share, learn, and most importantly, connect. However, there are moments when the stakes feel unbearably high, like when my anxiety could easily manifest into panic. I prepared to present in front of a board whose expectations were suffocating. As I stood on stage, the air thick with tension, I was acutely aware of each judgmental look. But rather than retreat into my script, I leaned into the moment, literally. I took a deep breath and shared a story about failure. Empathetically, I acknowledged the pressure they faced in their own roles. For the first time, I saw a flicker of vulnerability in their eyes, shifts in posture as they relaxed. A wave washed over me as I realized empathy isn't merely about understanding others, it's about inviting them to a shared experience. As I began to wrap up my presentation, a familiar feeling of urgency crept in. I knew my last few words would resonate or fall flat. It was a moment that could either solidify that trust I had built or unravel it entirely. I took a risk, asking them to reflect on their own challenges and how they could confront their fears. I urged them to take action, not just in business, but in their communities. "What can we do together?" I asked, feeling the weight of my words. There was silence, followed by a hum of conversation. They were no longer just an audience, they were partners. The tension that had filled the room moments before now transformed into a tentative, hopeful energy. I had seen the impact of empathy unfold right in front of me. Chapter 4: Crafting Your Message, Clarity and Impact. The Importance of a Strong Opening. I'll admit, my initial attempts at crafting openings often fell as flat as a pancake left out overnight. I remember the first story I ever wrote, filled with grand ambitions and high hopes. I spent days thinking about intricate plots and character development, only to realize that my beginning sounded like a dull lecture. It opened with a weather report. How utterly uninspiring. I kept asking myself, how could I have missed the most critical part? It turns out that captivating an audience's attention right from the start is less about what we say and more about how we say it. Strong hooks, intriguing anecdotes, or thought-provoking questions are essential for drawing readers into our narratives. Consider this approach. Instead of starting with background information that may bore readers, why not drop them right into the action? I once wrote a piece that began with a character standing at a crossroads, thunder rumbling overhead, and a sense of urgency washing over them. Immediately, readers were left wondering what choice they had to make, what danger lay ahead. They were caught, hooked by emotions and curiosity. That opening set the tone and drew readers closer to the heart of the story. As I honed my skills over the years, I realized that my openings needed to ignite curiosity. I took time to examine the stories that captivated me. I observed how authors would ask profound questions that lingered in my mind, or shared jaw-dropping truths that made me reflect long after I closed the book. Inspired by these techniques, I began experimenting with my own openings. I invented scenarios that immediately plunged my readers into vivid landscapes, capturing visceral experiences that both invoked fear and excitement. I shared moments that felt intensely graphic, bittersweet, or hilariously awkward. Trying different strategies allowed me to understand what resonates deeply with readers, and importantly, invited them to experiment with their own openings. Using stories to make your point. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon when I found myself standing in front of a group of young professionals, many of whom were still clutching their umbrellas and wondering why they had braved the weather for a public speaking workshop. The room was filled with an air of skepticism, a visible reluctance to engage. I took a deep breath, looking into their expectant faces, knowing that if I wanted to connect with them, I needed more than just facts and figures. I needed to tell a story. As I spoke about my experience of stumbling through a high-stakes presentation early in my career, the once distant faces started to shift, eyebrows raised, lips curving into slight smiles. I described how I had pored over my slides the night before, only to misplace my notes at the very moment I stepped onto the stage. Mortified yet determined, I had stood there, recalling a story my grandmother used to share about resilience. It was in that moment, instead of focusing on my slip-up, I shifted my narrative and shared her wisdom with my audience. The key, I had told them, is not whether you fall, but how you rise again. I could see the shift from discomfort to connection, and that's when I knew the power of storytelling was in full effect. Incorporating personal anecdotes into speeches not only humanizes the experience, but also invites the audience to relate on a personal level. They were no longer just listeners, they had become participants in my story. However, the essence of effective storytelling lies not only in the tale told, but also in the framework of delivery. I learned that a good story has a clear beginning, middle, and end. It creates a narrative arc that builds tension and invites empathy. When you weave in sensory details, emotions, and lessons learned, your message becomes more than just words. It becomes a shared experience. I encouraged the group to think of their own stories, and as they began to share, I was delighted to see their confidence bloom. To empower you in this journey, here's a simple framework. Start with a hook, lay out the conflict, and offer a resolution. By establishing a dilemma, be it an internal struggle or an external challenge, you can raise tension, pulling your audience closer and keeping their attention. As I told the professionals about my initial failures, the vulnerability I showed shifted from mere embarrassment to a relatable experience. I emphasized that everyone has their struggles, and by sharing them, we foster connections that stretching beyond the podium. But what happens when the story is too close to home? I recall a pivotal moment when I unveiled a personal struggle in a workshop on leadership. I hesitated at first. What if sharing my defeat could undermine my authority? Yet, in that moment of vulnerability, I realized that my audience was searching for authenticity. I leaned into my moment of doubt, explaining how it had fueled my journey and shaped my understanding of true leadership. By owning my narrative, I not only connected with them, but invited a deeper dialogue around our shared vulnerabilities. It was a risk, but witnessing their nods of understanding made it abundantly clear. Stories resonate. As I concluded the workshop, I watched as many attendees mulled over their own stories, preparing to find the most impactful way to share them. What filled the room was not just knowledge shared, but a resurgence of confidence, a reminder that our stories work as bridges, connecting one human to another. However, tension lingered as we approached the end, the question looming: could they find their story amidst their chaos? Would they dare to share those experiences that felt too risky or too personal with an audience? The next steps were theirs to take, but I left the session hopeful, knowing that their willingness to tell their stories could not only empower them, but enlighten those around them as well. Concluding with power, leaving a lasting impression. As I reflect on the many talks I've given over the years, one thing stands out: the power of a strong conclusion. Whether I was speaking to a group of students or presenting to a room full of seasoned professionals, I learned early on that how you end your message can be just as critical, if not more so, than how you start it. I've seen audiences shift in their seats, eyes lighting up, moments of clarity washing over them when a speaker wraps up a talk with a powerful call to action or a thought-provoking quote. It's in these final moments that clarity emerges and transformations begin, and I've made it my mission to harness this power every time I take the stage. One of my most memorable speaking events was at a community conference focusing on mental health awareness. I spoke passionately about breaking the stigma that surrounds mental illness, sharing personal stories interwoven with research that highlighted the urgency of this dialogue. As I approached the end, I could see the audience's engagement. They were leaning forward, reflecting on their own experiences and the interplay between their lives and the larger mental health narrative. I knew then that I could either leave them with words that would dissolve into the ether or something they would carry with them. I opted for the latter, summarizing my message succinctly and offering a poignant quote from Maya Angelou. "I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." The words hung in the air, allowing for a moment of introspection and connection, and I felt a surge of victory, knowing I had successfully planted a seed of thought. After that day, I received countless messages from attendees who felt inspired to speak up, to share their own stories, and to seek help when needed. I realized that the conclusion of my talk had served not just as an ending, but as a doorway to new conversations. When crafting a conclusion, I encourage everyone to incorporate their own unique touch, a personal anecdote that can resonate with the audience, or an actionable step they can take away. It's all about leaving your audience with something to ponder, a thread to hold on to as they walk away, ensuring that your message lingers within their thoughts long after the final applause fades. Remember, every end is just a new beginning, and it's the impact we leave that lingers on. As I guide you through creating memorable conclusions, my hope is that you too will experience the triumph of transforming an ordinary farewell into a powerful farewell. Empower your audience by encouraging them to act, to change, or to reflect. The magic lies not just in what you say, but in how you say it, and ultimately, how you make them feel at the end of your journey together. So as you prepare for your next speaking engagement or presentation, ask yourself, what impression do you want to leave? And more importantly, what legacy will your concluding words create? Chapter 5, Body Language, Speaking Without Words, the Art of Nonverbal Communication. As I settled into my chair in the brightly lit conference room, I felt a familiar flutter of nerves replaced by a sense of anticipation. I had prepared my presentation meticulously, ensuring that every word was polished to perfection. But as I glanced at my colleagues, I suddenly realized that the crux of my communication lay not just in my carefully chosen phrases, but in the unspoken language I would convey through my posture and expressions. It was a stark reminder of how much we communicate without uttering a single word. Reflecting on past experiences, I remembered a particular instance that left a lasting imprint on my understanding of nonverbal cues. I had been invited to deliver a keynote speech at an industry event. The crowd was lively, buzzing with excitement, their eyes filled with anticipation. But as I began to speak, I noticed that my initial slouch and crossed arms inadvertently projected defensiveness and insecurity. It was as if my body was at odds with the enthusiasm in my voice. Midway through the presentation, I caught a glimpse of a few faces drifting into distraction. It dawned on me that I was losing their engagement, not because of my content, but because my body was whispering a different story. In that moment, I made a conscious effort to realign my posture. I squared my shoulders, uncrossed my arms, and leaned slightly forward. Instantly, the energy in the room shifted. It was as though my newfound posture had cast an invisible net, drawing them back into my orbit. My gestures became more animated, naturally guiding the narrative I had crafted. I embraced the space around me, stepping from one side of the stage to the other, creating a more dynamic connection. The audience leaned in, eyes sparkling with interest. It was a powerful lesson in the necessity of awareness. Our bodies can be powerful allies or detrimental foes in the art of communication. As I delved deeper into the nuances of nonverbal communication, I began to understand that these cues extend far beyond just posture and gestures. Facial expressions tell stories of their own. A raised eyebrow can signify skepticism, while a genuine smile fosters warmth and trust. I remember a conversation with a colleague who often struggled to convey enthusiasm. Though their words were optimistic, their furrowed brow and tightly pursed lips unintentionally muted the message. After sharing insights on the importance of aligning expressions with emotions, they began to consciously express joy, showing teeth and sparkling eyes during discussions. The change was transformative, both for them and for their audience. But nonverbal communication isn't solely about personal interactions. It transcends into digital realms as well. I think about video conferences, where subtle shifts like eye contact or even the angle of a smile can dramatically alter engagement. In an increasingly virtual world, it's critical we harness those nonverbal cues to enhance our presence and connection. One memorable Zoom meeting brought this into sharper focus. I noticed a colleague speaking fervently about a project while the camera was inadvertently angled so that we only saw their forehead. Despite their passionate words, the disconnection created by their visibility dampened the impact of their message. It was a vivid illustration that being present physically and ensuring our digital representation conveys that presence is vital. Embracing this journey toward mastering nonverbal communication, I became more attuned to the everyday interactions around me. I started observing how much our bodies spoke before we even opened our mouths. At coffee shops, where conversations buzzed softly in the background, I found myself fixating on a couple seated nearby. They seemed locked in a heated discussion, yet their avoidance of eye contact and stiff postures reflected a different narrative, a resolution far from reach. It sparked an epiphany that our physical presence carries the weight of our intentions. It can heal or harm the intricate threads of connection we cultivate with those around us. As I pen this chapter, I urge you not to underestimate the power of your body language, expressions, and gestures. Take a moment to reflect on your own experiences where your physical presence may have contradicted your spoken words. Become a student of the art of nonverbal communication. Recognize that your body has a voice of its own, one that can amplify your message or shroud it in confusion. Let us all step forward into this realm of awareness, ready to harness the profound connection between our words and the language of our bodies, thereby transforming every conversation we hold into a more vibrant exchange of understanding and empathy. Yet, as I finish these reflections, a nagging question lingers. What happens when we fail to align these powerful elements, and who ultimately pays the price for our miscommunication? The answer may lead us deeper than we first anticipated, beckoning with the promise of insights untold. Reading your audience's reactions. There's a certain alchemy to public speaking that transforms mere words into an experience. It's not enough to prepare articulate points. I learned early on that truly successful speakers possess a remarkable ability to gauge their audience's reactions. Each facial expression and subtle shift in posture is a piece of a puzzle that can shape the entire course of a speech. I still remember my first big presentation, the pit in my stomach gnawing at me as I scanned the room, desperately hoping for an engaged crowd. As I stood there, articulating my carefully crafted introduction, a wave of silence and blank stares washed over me. It felt like I was holding a conversation with a wall. The laughter I had anticipated never materialized, and instead, the creaking of chairs became the soundtrack of my anxiety. However, amidst that stillness, I noticed a couple of people shifting in their seats, their eyes darting around, a hint of restlessness. Juggling embarrassment and resolve, I chose to pivot. I tossed in a humorous anecdote, something lighthearted to tickle their curiosity. To my delight, the air sparked with chuckles and nods. That moment taught me an invaluable lesson. Reading my audience was as crucial as what was coming out of my mouth. In subsequent speeches, I began adopting a more observant lens. I focused on key nonverbal cues, raised brows that signaled intrigue, crossed arms that hinted at skepticism, and the subtle synchrony of head nods that filled me with encouragement. Each reaction was a whisper urging me to either lean into my message or adjust my approach. This awareness transformed the way I presented myself. It became a dialogue rather than a monologue. I started to consciously interact with the audience, weaving in questions that invited participation. At that point, those moments of laughter, or even the occasional silence, became not only feedback, but also a partnership in the storytelling process. Over time, the more I immersed myself in this practice, the more I found ways to elevate my engagement. One evening, speaking at a community assembly, I sensed my audience's mood shift sharply as I mentioned a controversial topic. The room fell cold, an audience caught between curiosity and discomfort. Rather than pressing on with my planned remarks, I took a step back. I shared a personal story that revealed my own struggle with the issue, inviting empathy and connection. Gradually, I could almost feel the tension dissipate as they leaned forward in their seats, eager to hear how I navigated those turbulent waters. It was in those visceral moments that I discovered the true power of audience engagement. When I swapped fear with vulnerability, I unlocked genuine understanding. Every presentation presents a unique rhythm, one that isn't determined solely by the speaker, but by how the audience responds. As I moved through various settings, from boardrooms to classrooms, I found myself entranced by the ebb and flow of reactions. The tricky part? Knowing when to ride the wave and when to redirect it. I learned the art of pacing, noticing when the audience began to glaze over, and strategically infusing energy or anecdotes to recapture their interest. A well-timed pause after a punchline had the power to amplify laughter, while a soft-spoken moment could draw their focus back when drifting. Each interaction was a dance, an intricate blend of stimuli, responses, and adjustments. However, all this awareness doesn't come without its trials. Flash forward to a high-stakes presentation in front of a panel of industry giants, I sensed my usual rhythm stall. A crucial point felt flat, and I could see their eyes glaze over. Panic surged, but instead of freezing, I reminded myself to check in with them. I invited questions, embracing the discomfort and asking for their opinions on the topic at hand. Almost instantly, engaged dialogue bloomed from that shipping yard of uncertainty, the panelists animatedly discussing their perspectives. In those moments of impending tension transformed into insight, I realized how imperative it is to create space for reciprocity. Reading the room fostered not only understanding of reactions, but also built a bridge of connection. Public speaking is like a living organism that thrives on a reciprocal relationship between the speaker and the audience. Nurturing that connection through attentive observation transcends traditional communication. It enhances clarity and fosters trust. As I share this journey of evolution, I implore you, tap into this power. During your next presentation, lean into the uncomfortable moments, notice the nuances, and embrace the dialogue between you and your audience. Because it's in acknowledging their reactions that you may just transform the exchange from anxiety-ridden to exhilarating, paving the way for genuine engagement that leaves hearts a little lighter and minds a little brighter. But remember, every audience has its own rhythm, and each new gathering brings with it the potential for surprise. Confidence in movement, commanding the space. When I first started public speaking, I was a bundle of nerves. You know the feeling, palms sweaty, heart racing, and you wish you could just teleport to another dimension rather than stand in front of an audience. But one day, something clicked. I realized that movement was not just an arbitrary part of delivering a speech, but a potent tool, an extension of my message and my personality. The way I moved, the space I commanded, became integral to how I connected with my listeners. In my early days, I often found myself pegged to the same spot, rooted like a tree. The irony? Trees don't inspire. It wasn't until I began to pace, step forward, and occasionally venture to the edge of the stage that I discovered the electrifying power of purposeful movement. I recall a presentation on the importance of innovation. As I spoke about the dynamic shifts in technology, I took a step forward, gesturing towards the audience as though inviting them into the conversation. Their eyes lit up, the energy shifted, and I felt the room pulse with engagement. I had not only emphasized my points, but I had also fostered a connection that felt tangible, rooted in collective understanding. As I continued honing my craft, I began to understand that movement should never be haphazard. Each step, each gesture should be deliberate. I remember a moment during a particularly heated debate. My opponents were aggressive, the atmosphere thick with tension. Instead of retreating, I stood tall, moved confidently from one end of the stage to the other, using the space to punctuate my thoughts. It was as if I were dancing on a tightrope, balancing the weight of my arguments while maintaining a firm grip on the attention of the audience. And guess what? They were captivated, their focus glued to me. Commanding the space transformed my message and built my authority. Now, I invite you to reflect on your own comfort levels with movement. Perhaps you share my earlier hesitance or find joy in dynamic expression. There's no right or wrong, only what feels authentic to you. Consider practicing in front of a mirror, experimenting with stepping forward when you make an important point, or varying your posture based on the content you're delivering. You'd be surprised how simply adjusting your position can elicit a response, from enthusiastic nods to engaged laughter. However, I must caution against overdoing it. Movement loses its effectiveness if it's not rooted in intention. Picture this: a speaker that paces back and forth repeatedly, muttering to themselves as they drown in their thoughts. Instead of projecting confidence, they risk coming off as anxious or unfocused. The line between captivating and chaotic is razor thin, and mastering that balance can be your key to truly commanding the space. As I share this with you, I can feel the pulse of anticipation building. Perhaps you've even started to visualize yourself thriving in such dynamics. Embrace that spark. Dive into the process of exploring how movement enhances your authority. Remember that each time you share your voice with the world, you weave your unique narrative into the fabric of human connection. Confidence in movement isn't just about filling a space, it's about owning it, making it yours, and allowing each step to echo the power of your words. Now, picture the decisive moment when you step out to face your audience. Your heart races, but this time it's not out of fear. It's the exhilarating rush of connection, anticipation, and purpose. This is not merely a speech, it's an experience. Every step, every gesture amplifies your message, creating a symphony of verbal and physical communication. Ready to put this into practice? Choose your next speaking opportunity wisely. Command the space with confidence and let the world see how movement can breathe life into your words. Chapter 6: Voice Dynamics: Finding Your Unique Sound Volume and Pacing, the Rhythm of Speech. The first time I stood in front of an audience, my heart raced like a jackrabbit on a caffeine spree. My palms were sweaty, and as I opened my mouth to speak, the words tumbled out in a chaotic rush, like a waterfall that had just experienced a late spring thaw. I had prepared all week for that moment, rehearsed my lines countless times in front of the mirror, yet when it finally came down to it, I let my nerves take the wheel. In retrospect, I realized that this experience wasn't just about stage fright. It highlighted the critical role of volume and pacing in effective communication. Volume is not merely about how loud we speak, it's a tool to convey emotion and engage our listeners. On that fateful day, I felt like I was shouting into a void, my voice bouncing off the walls but failing to reach the hearts of my audience. Once, during a workshop, a seasoned speaker pointed out that in controlling our volume, we can guide the emotional landscape of our speeches. He demonstrated how a soft whisper could draw listeners in with intimacy, while a sudden raise in volume could punctuate a key point, creating urgency. This realization struck me like a bolt of lightning. I needed to learn to wield my voice not as a blunt instrument, but as a finely tuned musical score. Pacing, on the other hand, is the heartbeat of our speech. A well-paced delivery can turn a simple story into a gripping narrative, while a rushed, breathless flow can leave audiences confused and disengaged. I remember a time when I was invited to speak at my old university. It was an opportunity to share my journey, but instead of savoring the moment and allowing my narrative to unfold organically, I found myself racing through my anecdotes. It was as if I was on a train that had missed its stop and was now barreling down a track at breakneck speed. Instead of enjoying the scenery of my experiences, I glossed over them, missing opportunities to connect deeply with my listeners. Fortunately, through trial and error, I've learned techniques to find the right rhythm for my speeches. One of my favorites is the power of pauses. A well-timed pause can serve as a breath for both the speaker and the audience. It allows the message to sink in and grants the audience a moment to reflect. I now practice the art of stopping just before delivering a pivotal sentence, letting the silence build anticipation. Often I can almost hear the audience lean in, waiting for the words that'll hit home. Moreover, practicing my pacing through storytelling has become an invaluable tool. I break down my speech into individual stories and then I tell those stories to myself, both slowly and rapidly, to gauge how each pace feels. This exercise has taught me that some stories, when told slowly, can resonate on a deeper emotional level, while others may require a frantic pace to evoke excitement and energy. For instance, I found that sharing an exciting moment from a competitive event was much more powerful at a quicker pace, while a poignant lesson learned from a loss was better received when shared slowly, allowing every word to resonate. Yet, despite these techniques, I still face challenges, particularly in live settings where adrenaline can cloud judgment. Just last month, I was asked to present at a local conference. Anticipation buzzed in the air, but as I took the stage, my nerves resurfaced. I quickly fell into my old patterns, speeding up my delivery. It wasn't until I noticed the puzzled expressions on some faces in the audience that I realized I needed to consciously rein things back. I paused, took a breath, and focused on my volume. I dropped my voice for a moment, almost a whisper, and as the room drew closer, I felt the energy shift. The challenge of balancing volume and pacing became a real-time lesson that day, and I walked away with a renewed commitment to not just speak, but to truly communicate. Finding the rhythm of speech is much like dancing. It's about connection and the ebb and flow created by movement. As I continue to practice and refine my skills, I remind myself that mastering my volume and pacing doesn't come from perfection, but from embracing the process. It's about allowing the highs and lows of our voices to echo the stories we want to tell, making our delivery not just a recounting of words, but a vivid experience that stays with our audience long after we've walked off the stage. But what happens when that rhythm falters? When the audience begins drifting? when the magic you so carefully cultivate starts to slip away. That's the fear every speaker must face, a reality that lurks as we navigate the delicate balance of speaking with heart and clarity. Practicing intonation, adding emotion intonation. It's a word that can conjure visions of music, poetry, or maybe even the musicality of everyday conversation. For me, it has come to symbolize the heart and soul of speech. When I first started my journey in public speaking, I was naive to the power of pitch and tone. I was more focused on the content of my speeches than the way I delivered them. Yet after a few stumbles on stage, I came to realize that the difference between a connection and a complete disconnect with my audience often boiled down to one thing: intonation. One particular experience stands out vividly in my memory. I was to speak at a local community center about the importance of mental health awareness. The topic alone was heavy, but as I stood before the crowd, I felt the gravity of their collective silence. There were no murmurs, no rustling programs, just a room full of expectant faces. My heart raced as I launched into my introduction, but despite my practiced words, it felt hollow. After a few minutes of feeling like I was losing the very few eyes that were locked on me, I paused, inhaled deeply, and remembered a technique I had practiced, varying my pitch to match the emotional weight of my message. With a slight shift, I lowered my voice and spoke slowly, almost as if confiding a secret. "This isn't just a talk," I sighed. "This is a call to understand that it's okay to not be okay." The change in my tone was visceral. My words began to resonate differently in the chilly air of the auditorium. I noticed heads nodding, people leaning in. I was drawing them closer, not just physically, but emotionally, bridging a gap I hadn't realized existed. That day, I learned that intonation could transform a lecture into a lifeline. In my research, I found studies highlighting the psychological impact of vocal variety on engagement. Speakers who use dynamic intonation are remembered longer and positively affect their audience's emotional state. This isn't mere anecdote, it's science. Varying pitch creates peaks and valleys, similar to a piece of music, allowing listeners to experience moments of intensity and calm. When I started experimenting with this in my practice sessions, the results were undeniable. My vocal exercises transformed mere speeches into a symphony of emotional cadences. Consider low tones, which often convey seriousness or melancholy. They command attention, like the deep thrum of a cello. On the other hand, high tones can evoke excitement or urgency, like the bright trill of a flute. Balancing these tones allows for not only variation, but deeper emotional expression. Crafting my speeches became like composing, a blending of highs and lows to evoke laughter, contemplation, and sometimes even tears. After several speaking engagements, I decided to put it to the ultimate test. I entered a local competition where the stakes were higher and the audience larger. My topic was personal, my struggle with anxiety and how I had turned to public speaking as a form of healing. To prepare, I practiced as if I were pouring my heart into a performance. Each mirror rehearsal was punctuated by my fluctuations in pitch. As the day approached, the nerves danced in my stomach. Would my intonation translate? Would the crowd feel the weight of my experience? Finally, the moment arrived, and as I stood before a sea of faces, I took a breath and plunged into my story. With each rise and fall of my voice, I painted a picture of vulnerability. I asked a question, letting my tone drop to invite introspection, and then I lifted it to share the hope I had clung to through my darkest days. Eyes sparkled with understanding, and for the first time, I felt the electric pulse of true connection. As I wrapped up, I was nearly overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience. The echo of my dynamic delivery lingered in the auditorium for far longer than any words could. I had not simply shared a message, I had stirred emotions, changed perceptions, and when the applause erupted, I felt it go beyond obligation. It was a genuine acknowledgement of shared humanity. Intonation is not just an art, it is a practice. All of us have a story to tell, and each of these stories holds the potential to connect with someone who needs to hear it. As you prepare for your next opportunity, I urge you, pay attention to your intonation. Practice sliding effortlessly from a whisper to a shout, from solemnity to joy. Move your audience with your voice. Make them feel every note of your message. The magic is in the modulation, and as you embrace the range, you'll find yourself not just speaking, but truly communicating. Who knows, the next time you rise to share your voice, it may just resonate in ways you've never imagined. Breath control, the unsung hero. As I stood behind the podium, my heart raced like a runaway train, echoing the anxiety swirling within me. Public speaking had always been a daunting mountain to climb, but it wasn't until I discovered the transformative power of breath control that my approach shifted. I remember the very first time I confronted a crowd, my palms slick with sweat, my throat tight as if gripped by an invisible vice. It was then that I realized how essential learning to manage my breath would become on this journey. In the waning moments before I stepped into the spotlight, I took a deep breath, one that I would learn to savor and control. Inhaling deeply through my nose, I felt my diaphragm expand, filling my lungs to their fullest. Holding that breath for a 4 count, I released it slowly through my mouth, envisioning the rising tide of my anxiety receding. This wasn't just breathing, it was a lifeline. It was my secret weapon, my unsung hero. Over time, this breath control transformed me not just as a speaker, but as a person. I began to weave deep breathing techniques into my daily routine, and not just before presentations. Whether I was preparing for a big meeting or experiencing an everyday stressor, I always found solace in a mindful inhalation followed by a measured exhalation. There's a wealth of scientific research that backs up this practice, studies demonstrating that focused breathing can nearly instantaneously reduce cortisol levels, ushering in calmness where chaos once ruled. To help you integrate this practice, let me share 2 exercises that became my anchor. First, find a quiet space, close your eyes, and take a deep breath in for a count of 4, then hold for a count of 4, and exhale for a count of 6. As you do this, visualize your stress escaping with each exhale. The second exercise is even simpler. Anytime you feel the urge to rush or lose your composure, try the box breathing technique. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts, and hold again for 4 counts. Visualize each breath forming a box, enclosing your anxiety until it dissipates into thin air. Of course, these practices didn't eliminate my fear instantly. The night I was to deliver my TED Talk, my nerves flared like wildfire. Just moments before my turn, I felt the adrenaline surge, my heart pounding out a chaotic rhythm. I closed my eyes, standing in the shadows backstage, and focused on my breath. Counting each inhale and exhale, I envisioned each breath filling me with confidence and poise. The stage called to me, a daunting expanse of lights and expectant faces. Yet, I held fast to my breath. Each inhale reminded me of my preparation and the smiles of those who supported me. Each exhale released a hint of my trepidation, making space for what was about to come. As I stepped onto that stage, the world felt both monumental and achingly small. A wave of calm surged through me, a manifestation of those deep breathing sessions I had practiced tirelessly. The spotlight was no longer a scalding sun, it felt like a warm embrace. My voice rang clear as I spoke, and I could feel the audience leaning in, breathing with me, captivated by every word. The culmination of breath control, the unsung hero, enveloped me. Who would have thought that something so simple could wield such power? As I shared this experience with those who had gathered, I realized something profound. Breath control isn't just about managing anxiety. It's about engaging with your audience, about forging a connection beyond the spoken word. When we breathe deeply and intentionally, we invite others into our space, creating a rhythm that transcends mere dialogue, an exchange that is palpable. And as I stood there, I knew my journey was not just about conquering fear, but guiding others toward finding their voice as well. Now, dear reader, I challenge you to embrace this practice. The next time you face an audience, remember to breathe. Take that moment for yourself before delivering your message. With each breath, you will find yourself more grounded, more present. An audience may come to hear you speak, but it will be your breath control that carries the weight of your words, turning anxious energy into a symphony of shared understanding. Chapter 7: Overcoming Obstacles, Handling Anxiety and Doubt. My worst moments, learning from mistakes. The first time I stood before a crowd, my heart felt like it was doing somersaults. I had spent weeks rehearsing, practicing my speech in front of mirrors, and tweaking every word for clarity. But in that moment, as I faced an audience of eager faces, the well-rehearsed words evaporated, leaving only a stuttered mess in their place. The deafening silence that followed my fumbling attempt to recover is a sound that still haunts me. I could feel my cheeks flush, the weight of embarrassment like a 100-ton brick pressing down on me. As I left the stage, I was convinced I'd ruined my chance at speaking altogether. But that moment, while painful, became a pivotal lesson in resilience. I learned that even the most seasoned speakers stumble, and that mistakes are simply part of the journey. Reflecting on that experience, I realized that the embarrassment I felt was an opportunity to grow. It pushed me to understand the importance of self-compassion and to redefine my relationship with failure. A second incident occurred during a presentation at work. I had set up everything meticulously, or so I thought, until I realized I had forgotten to attach the critical document that housed the data I was supposed to present. The shocked faces of my colleagues felt like daggers. I scrambled to explain, my thoughts racing faster than my words. It was mortifying, and my palms were slick with sweat. However, as I later sat down to process, I acknowledged that I had learned more from that oversight than I had in any flawless presentation. I discovered the value of preparation, not just in rehearsing speeches, but in double-checking every detail. I also learned about the grace of recovery, how a genuine apology can shift the atmosphere in a room, transforming frustration into support. Perhaps the most absurd moment came during a public speaking competition. I was passionate about my topic, and as I passionately gestured while speaking, my elbow connected with a glass of water, sending it splashing across the front row. Gasps erupted, eyes widened. For a moment, I was frozen in embarrassment, but then something shifted. Instead of cringing, I made a joke about it, turning the tension into laughter. The audience responded warmly, and I realized that the ability to embrace unpredictability could strengthen my connection with my listeners. Mistakes are part of sharing human experiences, and humor can bridge even the widest gaps caused by awkwardness. Each of these experiences, although embarrassing at the time, became valuable teachers. They encouraged me to adopt a mindset of reflection rather than self-criticism. When I shared my mistakes with friends and colleagues, I noticed a ripple effect. Many shared their own stories, realizing they too had stumbled on their journeys. It fostered a culture of openness, allowing us to view our failures not as setbacks but as stepping stones. This chapter of my life became a healing process, underscoring that mistakes are not the end. They can often be the very beginnings of something vital. So, to anyone reading this, remember that your worst moments can morph into your greatest lessons. Embrace the missteps, laugh at the errors, and find strength in vulnerability. The things you might dread can one day illuminate the path to resilience and growth. And as I have learned, it's not about how many times you stumble, but how you rise each time, with humor, courage, and a heart open to learning. Techniques to combat nervousness. The first time I faced an audience, my hands trembled like leaves in a storm. As I stood behind the podium, my thoughts whirled chaotically, drowning out the sound of my beating heart. It's a familiar narrative for many of us. Nervousness can creep in uninvited, turning what should be an exciting moment into a battleground. Yet, through the years, I discovered a toolkit of practical strategies that transformed my anxiety into a source of strength. Today, I want to share those techniques with you so you can also step onto that stage, confident and grounded. Let's start with visualization. Picture yourself standing before your audience. Everything is calm. Imagine the room filled with warm light, smiles on friendly faces, and the positive energy surrounding you. I remember a pivotal moment before a crucial presentation. I closed my eyes and envisioned myself nailing the key points, eliciting laughter and receiving applause. By creating a mental movie of success, I tricked my brain into believing I was already there. This powerful technique not only soothed my nerves, but also set a positive tone for what lay ahead. Preparation is another cornerstone in combating nervousness. I learned, through trial and error, that knowing my material inside and out builds a fortress around my confidence. When I gripped my notes firmly, I felt less like an imposter and more like an expert in the room. I've spent countless hours rehearsing my speeches, and I encourage you to do the same. Practice not just boosts your familiarity with the content, but also allows you to anticipate the audience's reactions, mitigating that acute sense of dread. Imagine walking into a room and knowing you've done everything you can to prepare for the unexpected. It's liberating. Finally, let's talk about positive affirmations. This technique can feel awkward at first, but it works wonders if you lean into it. Standing in front of a mirror, I declare statements like, "I am capable," or "I belong here." At first, I chuckled at how cheesy it seemed, but it gradually morphed into a ritual of sorts. By the time I left my house, those affirmations had woven themselves into my psyche, my own little pep talk lingering in the air. It seemed silly, but each affirmation chipped away at my self-doubt, preparing me for the real deal. There were nights I would lie awake, anxiety clawing at my chest, but these techniques became my armor. The more I practiced, the braver I felt stepping into the unknown. Yet, as anyone who has faced an audience knows, there are still those moments. Just last month, before appearing at a local event, I felt that familiar flutter of nerves rising again. I executed my visualization, rechecked my notes, and repeated my affirmations. I stepped on stage, my heart racing, excitement overlapping with fear. And right when I took that first step toward the microphone, I almost stumbled. What if this time it wouldn't work? What if I tripped over my words? The tension built up like a spring ready to snap. But guess what? I took a deep breath, paused, and the moment became mine. I could almost feel the warmth of connection with my audience before I even spoke. This is the power of these techniques, a tangible connection to your confidence, even when the nerves are still dancing wild. The role of mindfulness in performance. As I stood behind the stage curtains, a wave of anxiety washed over me. My palms were clammy, my heart raced, and I could hear the murmurs of the audience just beyond the heavy fabric. It was a moment I had encountered many times, yet each time it felt like my feet were sinking into a bog of nerves. Public speaking had always been a daunting endeavor, one that filled me with dread, but it was also a passion that pushed me toward improvement. Little did I know that the answer to my anxiety lay not in rehearsals or memorization, but in a quiet and powerful practice known as mindfulness. I had first stumbled upon mindfulness during a particularly stressful period in my life. Life felt overwhelming, and I needed an anchor. Meditation was my lifeline. Sitting in silence, focusing solely on my breath, began as a challenge. My thoughts would scatter like leaves in the wind. However, with patience, I found a sense of clarity I had never experienced before. As I deepened my practice, I slowly realized its potential beyond personal peace. It could redefine how I communicated with others, especially during those fraught moments before stepping onto a stage. Incorporating mindfulness into my public speaking preparation became a game changer. I created a ritual. Before every speech, I would take a few moments to close my eyes and focus on my breathing. Inhale deeply, hold, exhale slowly. With each breath in, I invited calmness. With each breath out, I released the tension of expectation. This simple practice helped diminish the mental chaos that often clouded my mind just before I spoke. As a result, as the moments rolled into minutes before my turn, I would feel a sense of grounding that felt almost surreal. The first time I truly felt the effects of mindfulness during a speech was at a community event. I was scheduled to speak on the importance of mental health awareness, a topic close to my heart. As I felt that familiar flutter of nerves, I closed my eyes for a moment and engaged in focused breathing. I noticed how my anxiety started to ebb away, replaced by a sharp clarity. When I walked onto that stage and engaged with the audience, I was not merely reciting words, I was communicating my truth, my passion. I could see the audience nodding, their expressions reflecting understanding and connection. With time, I noticed diving even deeper into mindfulness practices like body scans and visualization techniques further enhanced my performance. The fear of stumbling over words or losing my train of thought slowly faded. I was no longer just a speaker. I was part of a dialogue happening in real time. Each speech became a journey rather than a destination. By anchoring myself in the present moment, I learned to embrace the unpredictability of live speaking, welcoming the palpable tension with open arms rather than resisting it. As I continue this journey, I invite you, dear reader, to explore how mindfulness might serve you in your journey, whether it is on a stage or in everyday interactions. Imagine if you could transform your own experience, replacing fear with anticipation, anxiety with excitement. Mindfulness is more than just a calming technique. It is a profound lens through which to navigate the unpredictability of performance. I urge you to take those initial steps. Breathe deeply, let go of what you cannot control, and find the grounded space within where confidence thrives. With that, I encourage you to approach your next speaking opportunity with curiosity rather than dread. What if, in the midst of your nerves, you could find a moment to pause, breathe, and embrace the thrill of speaking? The journey of mindfulness awaits you, and with it, a newfound freedom in performance that could change everything. Chapter 8: Engagement Techniques, Making Your Speech Interactive, Asking Questions to Involve Your Audience. It's funny how a simple question can transform a room full of strangers into a vibrant tapestry of ideas and thoughts. I remember my first real experience with this, standing nervously in front of a small group at a local community center, unsure of how to kick off my talk about climate change. I had spent hours crafting the perfect introduction, filled with statistics and alarming facts. Yet as I looked out over the crowd, I felt an unexpected connection to their faces, which all seemed to say, "We're here, but what does this have to do with us?" That's when I decided to toss my script aside and ask them a question. How many of you have been personally affected by climate change in some way? The silence that followed was palpable. A few hands slowly rose, and I could see the glimmer of recognition in their eyes. Suddenly, it wasn't just a talk about abstract concepts. It became a conversation grounded in personal experiences. One by one, people opened up, sharing stories about record heat waves, floods, and their gardens strangled by invasive species. It turned out, asking a question had not only broken the ice, but also ignited a discussion that was far richer than I could have anticipated. Over time, I learned that the true art of engagement lies in the questions we ask. Whether I'm delivering a speech or leading a workshop, I've developed a toolkit of techniques to enhance audience participation. For instance, rather than asking broad questions that could overwhelm, I prefer to use specific prompts that invite individuals to reflect deeply. Questions like, "What do you think is the biggest barrier to fighting climate change in our community?" make it easier for listeners to connect their thoughts to the topic. This approach encourages dialogues rather than monologues and keeps everyone invested in the conversation. However, not every audience is the same. Some might flourish in an interactive setup, while others may take a little coaxing before they feel comfortable to share. I vividly recall another presentation where I sensed resistance. I stood before a group of marketing professionals engrossed in their laptops, seemingly indifferent to my efforts. Rather than stifling frustration, I decided to turn it into an opportunity. I paused, looked around, and mused aloud. What's been the most surprising customer insight you've learned this year? Immediately, the room shifted. Laptops closed, and Apple Watches were put on silent as individuals leaned in, eager to discuss their unique discoveries. With a carefully crafted question, I hadn't just seized their attention. I had sparked a collective inquiry that enriched the conversation exponentially. Now, you might be wondering, how can you master this art of questioning? First, it's crucial to listen actively. Pay attention to your audience's responses, both verbal and nonverbal. This will help you adjust your questions on the fly. Second, don't shy away from vulnerability. Share a personal experience related to your topic before posing your question. It humanizes the discourse and primes the audience to share in return. Lastly, always follow up. If someone raises a compelling point, acknowledge it and weave it back into your narrative. This reinforces the bond between you and your audience and invites others to contribute. Yet, despite all the strategies and tips, sometimes the most unexpected moments shape the best discussions. Just last month, I attended a panel discussion on technology's impact on education. The moderator asked, "What piece of technology has transformed your learning experience?" And then, surprisingly, everyone fell silent. It was a tense moment, the kind you could practically feel in your bones. In those few seconds, I could see the tension rising. The panelists fidgeted, and the audience shifted in their seats. But then, a brave soul in the back spoke up. My smartphone? I can learn anything on the go. This sparked a wave of exciting testimonies that reshaped the conversation entirely. By allowing a moment for reflection, a single answer thawed an unwilling crowd, demonstrating how a simple question, timed just right, can unleash waves of dialogue that no one expected. As I continue this journey of engaging audiences through questions, I'm reminded of the power they hold. Questions have the faculty to inspire, to connect, and, most importantly, to create memorable experiences where everyone leaves feeling heard and valued. The art of asking questions might seem simple, but it's a practice that evolves with each interaction. The real beauty lies in the unpredictable paths these conversations take, ultimately tightening our shared human experience in ways we might never have imagined. Utilizing technology, polls, and live feedback. As I prepared for my next presentation, I found myself reflecting on the countless times I had stood in front of an audience, in different faces staring back at me. It was a daunting experience, one that made my palms sweat and my heart race. Yet, I realized that technology could be my ally in overcoming this fear and transforming my presentations into dynamic dialogues. I decided to embrace live polling, a concept that had always intrigued me but felt slightly intimidating. As the day approached, I experimented with different polling tools, reading reviews, and watching tutorial videos late into the night. I stumbled across a platform that promised not only to engage my audience but also to provide real-time feedback. Excitement coursed through me as I imagined what it would be like to see my audience come alive, their opinions displayed on the screen. Finally, I felt equipped to turn a solitary lecture into a shared experience. The moment arrived. Bright lights, an expectant crowd, and a heart that was now more a drum roll than a ticking clock. As I introduced the first live poll, I felt a jolt of energy in the room. Questions flowed, and hands shot up in the air, eager to express opinions. With just a few taps on the screen, their thoughts transformed into vibrant graphs and charts. I could see the expressions change from passive listening to active involvement. Smiles, nods, that spark of a connection. It was such a profound shift, a reminder that my audience's insights held valuable weight indeed. As the polls continued, the environment became more electric. I was no longer merely speaking, I was conversing. Through their responses, I could adjust my approach, dive deeper into sections that resonated, or pivot entirely away from topics that didn't. With one slide, I ignited a discussion about technology's role in our lives. Their reactions fascinated me. Real-time feedback painted a vivid picture of their thoughts and feelings about the subject matter. Yet, I could sense an unexpected tension brewing as the room grew more animated. As I posed a particularly challenging question about the ethical implications of emerging tech, the room fell into a contemplative silence. Hands that had previously shot up hesitantly now lingered in the air, uncertainty flickering in their gazes. I took a moment, looking around, feeling the rising stakes. This was more than a simple poll. It was a reflection of their values, their hopes, and perhaps their fears. The air was thick with anticipation, a perfect paradox of vulnerability and strength. I wondered if I had pushed too far, but then again, was this not what I aimed for? Wasn't this real engagement? With my heart racing, I anticipated the final results to appear. A flood of answers came in, and the majority seemed to lean towards cautious optimism, yet a sizable minority expressed deep skepticism. I took a breath, realizing I was standing on the precipice of something significant. This was no longer just about technology. It was about shaping a collective narrative, one that could challenge perceptions and spark deeper discussions beyond that room. As I prepared to address the results, I felt the exhilarating pressure of responsibility. To speak truthfully, to honor their voices. In that moment, I recognized that utilizing technology in presentations was far more than a trend. It was a powerful tool for building bridges, not just between me and my audience, but among them as well. As I took the plunge into those results, I felt a sense of purpose wash over me, ready to harness their engagement and navigate the complexities of our shared discourse. But just as I opened my mouth to speak, a blaring notification interrupted us, a technical glitch. Suddenly, The adventure of connecting through technology was thwarted, leaving the room in suspense, each face shadowed by curiosity and perhaps a hint of apprehension. The power of humor in connecting with people. The trembling hands, the racing heart, the burgeoning sense of dread. These sensations flood my system each time I step up to the podium. Yet there's something else I've discovered that cuts through the tension like a hot knife through butter. Humor. It's an unexpected ally, a simple tool that can take an audience from the edge of their seats, filled with anticipation or anxiety, to a place of shared laughter and connection. I remember one particular evening, standing in front of a room filled with professionals who'd gathered for a conference way too early in the morning. Their faces were a mix of caffeine-fueled determination and the glazed expressions of sleep deprivation. At that moment, I felt an overwhelming desire to break the ice, perhaps more than any planned PowerPoint slide ever could. I launched into a light-hearted quip about a misadventure I had while trying and failing spectacularly to brew coffee before heading to the event. The laughter that followed was like a warm blanket wrapping around the audience. I could feel walls crumbling, and those once glazed expressions transformed into attentive smiles. It was a small moment, but it sparked a connection that lingered throughout my presentation. Humor is more than just amusement. It creates a bridge between speaker and audience, fostering relatability and reducing barriers. However, humor isn't just about making people laugh. It's also about navigating more intricate and sometimes tense waters. I recall a pivotal moment during a community rally surrounding a significant social issue. The atmosphere was dense, charged with apprehension and dissent. But with a well-timed anecdote about a debacle involving my cat, who had unwittingly become a social media sensation after stealing the show in a local video, I found a way to disarm the anxiety prevalent in the room. The laughter that followed was cathartic. It shattered the tension, enabling those present to feel more comfortable expressing their views. Time and again, I witnessed humor perform the seemingly impossible task of transforming resistance into dialogue. As I reflect on these experiences, I recognize the delicacy required when harnessing humor in public speaking. Just like a well-cooked soufflé, a successful humorous moment needs the right recipe, carefully chosen material, thoughtfully delivered, and always with an ear for the audience's response. So as I continue this journey of learning and sharing, I hope to inspire anyone reading this to embrace humor, not just as a diversion, but as a powerful tool for connection. Because in the end, the ability to break down barriers with a well-timed joke may be one of the most human traits we possess. And perhaps, in this increasingly polarized world, it's a skill we all need to cultivate. Chapter 9. The Role of Visual Aids, Enhancing Your Message, Effective Use of Slides and Graphics. When I first stepped into the world of presentations, armed with a vibrant palette of slides, I was convinced that the more I included, the better. Every image, every bright color seemed to sing with potential, promising to engage my audience. But what I learned through trial and error was a different song altogether, a bittersweet melody of simplicity and clarity. My journey began at a local community center, where I was called to present my ideas to a gathering of eager entrepreneurs. I excitedly created a deck with multiple animations, overlaid text, and a backdrop that could rival a pop concert. The result? A room full of blank stares and confused expressions. It was as if I had thrown glitter into the air. It looked beautiful, but no one could find the meaning hidden in the sparkle. After that disheartening experience, I realized that effective slides weren't about being flashy. They were about enhancing my message, not overshadowing it. I started to study design principles that could breathe life into my presentations while keeping the audience's focus where it mattered most. I discovered the power of white space and how to let my visuals breathe. I learned to employ contrasting colors to guide attention, ensuring that text was easy to read and graphics were purposeful. Instead of overwhelming my audience with information, I focused on clarity, using charts and diagrams to represent data instead of scrolling through endless bullet points. Each element in my slides began to serve a specific function. They became tools to unlock understanding rather than obstacles to engagement. As I honed my skills, I found myself more confident in presenting, but the pivotal moment came when I received feedback from a mentor after a particularly exhaustive session with a corporate group. Your slides were clean and effective, but the real talk was in how you engaged with the visuals, she said, her voice steady but encouraging. That struck a chord. I learned that the goal of slides isn't merely to support the speaker, but to create a conversation with the audience. One day, I decided to try something new, coupling images that told stories instead of just illustrating points. I replaced dense paragraphs with single, striking visuals while I narrated deeper insights verbally. Audience engagement skyrocketed, and there was a palpable buzz of connection in the room. But as I stood in front of that group, watching their expressions morph from skepticism to interest, I still struggled with the tension of knowing when too much was too much. It was exhilarating and terrifying at once, like riding a wave that might either carry me triumphantly to the shore or dash me against the rocks. I introduced minimalist slides, each one a stepping stone along the path of my narrative, but with each new design, my pulse quickened. Would they find it boring? Would they yearn for more content? That dance between simplicity and depth often left me breathless, toes curled at the thought of judgment slipping in. Yet, as I learned more about the art of restraint, about trusting that my audience was just as interested in my story as in the visuals, I began to find a balance. This clarity and warmth, this honesty in communication, became my secret weapon against the ever-present fear of disengagement. And so, my adventure continues. Each presentation is a new canvas where I apply these hard-won lessons, nurturing my connection with the audience while evolving my own understanding of design. The true artistry lies not just in creating slides, but in crafting a narrative that wraps around my visuals, ensuring they complement rather than distract. As I stand before them, I hope to empower others to transform their presentations into conversations, sparking engagement and creating lasting impact without drowning in unnecessary clutter. Just me, my slides, and the hearts willing to listen, ready to navigate the joyful, tumultuous sea of shared ideas. When less is more, simplifying your visuals. It was a chilly Tuesday evening when I stood before a sea of faces, my heart racing like a drummer on a caffeinated spree. This was my moment to shine, to present an idea that had been burning in my mind for months. Yet, as I stood there, I felt an all too familiar knot of anxiety twist in my stomach. I glanced at the projector, whirring away, displaying my carefully crafted slides, each cluttered with text, graphs, and what I thought were profound insights. What I was oblivious to then was how the overload of information was drowning my audience instead of enlightening them. As I unfolded my vision, I began to notice the glazed expressions, the quick glances at watches, and the shuffling of feet. I was losing them. I remember feeling like a juggler, trying to keep too many balls in the air, each one representing a concept I desperately wanted to communicate. But instead of clarity, I was creating confusion. It was at that moment of unsettling realization that I understood less truly is more. In the days that followed, I dove into the philosophy of minimalism. I scrutinized my mistakes, the clutter that had clouded my presentations, and began to see a clear pattern. Simplicity leads to stronger connections. I came to appreciate that visuals should not only complement a message, but enhance it. As I experimented with each new approach, I gradually stripped away the unnecessary layers like peeling an onion, revealing the core message that deserved to shine. My goal became to distill information into bite-sized, impactful visuals. I learned how a single, powerful image could convey a message more effectively than a dozen words ever could. The transformation was not instantaneous. Each new iteration meant confronting my old habits and often resisting the urge to overload my slides with more content, more colors, and more everything. But with every failed attempt, I grew closer to understanding the elegance of simplicity. Time moved on, and one night stood out, a pivotal presentation that could determine the success of my project. This time, my slides were bare, almost startlingly so, sleek visuals, bold fonts, and empty space where before I would have crowded each frame with information. It wasn't easy to let go of my old safety net of over-explanation, but as I stepped onto that stage, something shifted within me. As I delivered my message, I watched my audience lean in, engaged, their eyes wide with fascination instead of fatigue. Fewer bullet points, fewer graphs, and fewer syllables worked wonders. I could see their minds working as they connected the dots of my message. And just when I thought I had painted the clearest picture, the tension peaked. A challenging question arose from the back, a query laden with skepticism. My heart skipped a beat. I realized that in my quest for clarity, I had left room for interpretation. Had I oversimplified? Could I still steer this back to confidence? My breath caught in my throat as I chose my words carefully. Suddenly, I was not just presenting, I was engaging, sparking a dialogue that had once felt dauntingly out of reach. In that moment, I learned that the balance between simplicity and depth is delicate yet powerful. Stripping away the noise does not mean skimming the surface. It invites deep understanding and real conversation. As I wrapped up my presentation, I felt a visceral connection with my audience, one crafted through clarity and an engaging exchange, rather than mere information overload. In that exhilarating moment, I understood that in the world of visuals, sometimes less truly is more. Practicing with visual aids, finding the balance. It was a rainy Thursday when I found myself standing in front of a small group at a local cafe, my heart thumping like a drum. I had meticulously prepared a presentation about storytelling techniques, complete with vibrant slides filled with images and bullet points. As I clicked through my first few slides, however, I noticed the air around me growing denser. My audience's eyes were glued to the screen, but not in the way I had hoped. They had turned into spectators, mere observers to the spectacle unfolding in front of them, rather than participants in the exchange of ideas. In my eagerness to showcase beautiful visuals, I had unwittingly drawn myself away from the essence of the presentation, connecting with my listeners. As each slide transitioned, I became increasingly engrossed in the graphics rather than the faces in front of me. I stumbled into the pitfall of letting my visual aids become a distraction rather than a tool to enhance engagement. I could see some eyes glazing over, tentative smiles morphing into confusion. It was a hard lesson in the importance of balance, a balance I had yet to master. User-focused storytelling means more than just illuminating a room with flashy visuals. To truly connect, I had to be present with my audience and read their reactions. The inflection in their voices and the subtle shifts in their bodies were crucial cues I needed to heed if I wanted my message to resonate. So I decided to shift gears mid-presentation. Instead of defaulting to my visuals, I initiated an open dialogue, inviting questions and sharing anecdotes. All the while, I lightly glanced back at my slides as supportive compliments rather than the main event. This seemingly simple pivot transformed the dynamic. Laughter erupted, eyes brightened, and suddenly we were all part of the same conversation. Reflecting back on that experience, I understand now that the key to successfully using visual aids isn't in forsaking them, but rather in seamlessly weaving them into the narrative. It's about knowing when to highlight a point with a slide and when to set it aside to foster genuine interaction. Practice was essential, true, but self-awareness was paramount. I started deliberately practicing my delivery by focusing not just on the content, but on the audience's responses as well. I would rehearse in front of friends, limit my slide use, and encourage them to interrupt with questions. This instinct to connect freed me from the shackles of my slides and made me a more compelling presenter. As I honed this new approach, I encountered another presentation, this time an opportunity to speak at a local conference. The stakes felt higher. The room buzzed with excitement, a veritable sea of faces waiting in anticipation. I could feel every pulse of anxiety coursing through me as I set up my slides, the cool glow of the screen sprawling behind me, a safety net I could easily cling to. I took a deep breath, remembering my previous lesson, and stepped forward. You might notice I'm going to share some images today, but I invite you to focus on the story as I narrate it. Let's explore this together. The audience engaged with each story, some even sharing their related experiences. We built a rhythm together, the slides enhancing the narrative without overshadowing my presence. However, right before I dived into a pivotal slide, I noticed a few audience members on their phones, their faces distracted, and anxiety began to creep back in. My heart raced, but I refused to bow to it. Instead, I moved deliberately to the slide that depicted a vivid scene from my story, a visual anchor for my words yet to come. I paused, inviting everyone's eyes up to me before speaking. Some of you may have seen this before. What does it remind you of? Let's take a moment to share. Letting the space breathe allowed me to regain control, even drawing the distracted back into the fold. In truth, that moment solidified how visuals could enhance our stories without muting our shared voices. It's all about striking that delicate balance, an exhilarating dance between visuals and the raw energy of human interaction. Over time, I learned that practicing this dance imbued my presentations with warmth and authenticity. I was no longer simply presenting. I was engaging, influencing, and, most importantly, connecting. And isn't that what we strive for? As I look ahead to future presentations, I carry with me the knowledge that visual aids are not my crutch, but my allies, ready to support the stories I yearn to tell. And yet, the journey continues because ultimately the most significant visual of all is the connection I build with my audience. Eyes, minds, and hearts wide open. Chapter 10. Feedback is your friend. Learning and growing. Seeking constructive criticism. As I stared at the blinking cursor on my screen, I couldn't shake the unease that washed over me. It was almost palpable, hanging in the air like humidity before a storm. I had just finished my latest piece, my heart pulsing through every word. Yet there it was, the nagging fear that I was too close to it, too enmeshed in the emotions that clouded my judgment. Enter the need for feedback, that crucial element that professional writers swear by. I had been here before, asking for opinions, but each time the process felt intimate, as if I was asking someone to judge a part of my soul. Seeking feedback isn't just about getting affirmation. It's an exercise in vulnerability. No one knows this better than I do. In one of my earliest attempts to garner critiques, I mustered the courage to approach a mentor, hoping to capture the magic of her seasoned eyes. I remember how she asked me to read an excerpt aloud. As I read, I peeked through the corner of my eye, trying to gauge her reaction. The crinkled brow, the occasional nod, it was a mix of encouragement and critique that left me hanging on her every word. When she finally spoke, she said things that stung but were undeniably true. She pointed out repetitive phrases, characters that felt flat, and moments that lacked clarity. That encounter taught me that receiving constructive criticism isn't about shattering my confidence, but about constructing a better version of my work. Listening isn't easy, yet it is fundamental. The art of receiving feedback gracefully is something I've had to cultivate, often reminding myself that the pain of criticism is fleeting while the lessons linger. Embracing it has led to transformative moments, each slice of insight carving a clearer path through my writing. I learned to approach each critique with the mindset of a sponge rather than a wall. But here's the catch. Being open to constructive criticism doesn't mean I shouldn't have standards. There are opinions I respect more than others, and each piece of feedback has to align with my vision and integrity as a writer. Crafting a voice often involves a little noise, I found out, from those who can help drown out the internal chaos of self-doubt. No moment is more pivotal than the first time I chose to share a piece of my writing with my peer group. We gathered in a local cafe, the room thick with the scent of fresh coffee. As my friends took turns sharing their thoughts, a knot tightened in my stomach. Criticism hovered above my shoulders, ready to crumble everything I'd built. Yet, amid the constructive criticism, there were glimmers of support. A friend commended my unique voice, while another highlighted areas for improvement, tactfully handcuffing my ego, but somehow giving room for growth as well. In that moment, I realized how rich and diverse feedback can be, how much stronger not just the writing, but the writer becomes through collective insight. As I reflect on these experiences, it strikes me how vital the act of seeking feedback is to both my work and my personal growth. It is less about the words shared and more about the courage to share ourselves, to let others at our work, and to accept their perspective. After all, growth often springs from discomfort. Nevertheless, that reminder grew distant when I faced a more daunting critique. A panel of seasoned authors invited to review my manuscript. Just the thought caused my stomach to do somersaults. Would they dismantle everything I had worked for? Would they see the ambition that flickered within those pages, or only the errors that clung stubbornly to the margins? As the day of reckoning approached, I found myself oscillating between hope and panic. I faced the prospect armed with a few protective shields, years of practice, learned resilience, and finally, a deep understanding of myself as a writer. I was on the verge of a transformative moment, and it was terrifying yet exhilarating. I'm reminded again that while feedback can hurt, it is the very fire through which good writers are forged, and sometimes it takes that burning sensation to emerge as something completely new. Using feedback to improve future performances. When I first started speaking publicly, I was filled with excitement and a hefty dose of nerves. My inaugural speech was a whirlwind of emotion, sweaty palms, an unsteady voice, and the unmistakable stares of an audience that ranged from curious to judgmental. Regardless of how it went, I knew one thing. I needed feedback, fast. After my speech, I gathered the courage to request feedback from a group of trusted friends and colleagues. Their responses varied. Some were supportive, while others were brutally honest. One friend mentioned that my introduction lacked clarity, an observation that struck a chord. I hadn't realized that I had jumped into my topic without providing the audience with a context. This was my first lesson in understanding the value of feedback, seeing it not as criticism, but a golden opportunity for growth. With this new mindset, I dove into my next speaking opportunity, determined to implement the suggestions I had received. I crafted a clearer introduction that outlined my key points succinctly. The result? Not only did I feel more confident, but the audience seemed more engaged. Their nods of understanding were like a warm embrace, reassuring me that I was on the right track. It was exhilarating to witness firsthand how a simple adjustment based on feedback could evolve the entire presentation. As I continued to speak, I made it a ritual to ask for constructive criticism after each performance. It became a form of self-check, a habit I embraced wholeheartedly. One instance that stands out was after a presentation on public speaking strategies. A fellow speaker had suggested I incorporate more storytelling into my talks. Initially, I hesitated. Wasn't my content compelling enough on its own? But then I recalled how personal anecdotes resonate with people. So I took a chance, weaving stories of my own journey into subsequent speeches. Each time I received feedback, whether it was praise or a suggestion for improvement, I began to see a cycle of growth take shape. One day, after a speech that received commendation for its engagement, a seasoned speaker approached me. "You have the makings of a great speaker," he said, "but don't shy away from spontaneity. Let your personality shine through." It was both an affirmation and a challenge. I took this advice to heart, experimenting with more impromptu remarks and playful banter during my talks. The audience responded with laughter and applause, invigorating my spirit in an unexplainable way. As I honed this iterative approach, the tension and excitement began to blend into a fluid rhythm. However, there was a looming challenge ahead that would test the very principles I had grown to rely on. An invitation arrived for me to speak at a prestigious conference, a platform filled with industry leaders and thinkers. The nerves screamed inside me, and the feedback I had so eagerly embraced now felt like a heavy mantle rather than a source of empowerment. In the weeks leading to the conference, I pored over every piece of feedback I had received. What if it wasn't enough? What if the audience's expectations were too high? The inner dialogue was relentless, pushing me toward an edge where I felt paralyzed by self-doubt rather than uplifted by past experiences. Yet, amid the spirals of anxiety, I recalled my journey. Each failure, each compliment, every thoughtful suggestion had crafted the speaker I was today. Ironically, my breakthrough came at the 11th hour, while pacing my living room rehearsing my speech. I realized that allowing fear to overshadow the lessons learned would only set me back. Instead of stumbling into that conference filled with apprehension, I would embrace the gathered wisdom of those who had provided the feedback that paved my way forward. As I stood before that audience, I felt a shift, a palpable energy of hope fueled by a commitment to growth that echoed in every word spoken. The stage was my canvas, and feedback had been my brushstroke for evolution. Celebrating small wins in your journey. As I sit at my desk, Wearing the usual coffee-stained pajamas that have become part of my uniform, I can't help but reflect on the little victories that have punctuated my journey. It's often said that success is a marathon, not a sprint, but we forget that marathons are made up of thousands of small strides. Each one of those strides deserves recognition. Recently, after a particularly grueling week of crafting a presentation, a spark of joy ignited within me when I received my first round of enthusiastic feedback. The relief and pride that surged through me felt like a tangible win, marking an important milestone on my path. Those small moments, they're the breadcrumbs that lead us deeper into our journey. On another occasion, I remember the thrill that washed over me when my audience responded with genuine laughter at a light-hearted joke I had rehearsed countless times. It was a small yet electric moment, a dance of connection that reminded me why I enjoy sharing my work. Applause echoed in the room, and for those fleeting seconds, it felt as if the world had paused to acknowledge the effort I had poured in. The unpredictable nature of audience engagement can be daunting, and those moments of acceptance reinforced my belief that every little achievement truly matters. But let's be honest, not every small win shines like a spotlight. Sometimes they're cloaked in the mundane and easily overlooked amidst the chaotic hustle of life. That's where the magic of intentional celebration comes into play. By taking a moment to reflect and appreciate these seemingly insignificant victories, we cultivate a sense of gratitude and motivation that fuels us for what lies ahead. The next time you write a sentence you're proud of, finish a chapter, or even send that nerve-wracking email, remember that these steps count just as much as the larger triumphs. They are the fuel that propels us, so don't let them slip away unnoticed. As I prepare for the next hurdle, I find solace in recognizing every small win I've accumulated. Each celebration, no matter how trivial it may seem to others, builds the resilience and courage I need to face the challenges yet to come. The road may be long and curves unpredictable, but with each small victory, I feel rooted in the journey, eager to celebrate alongside others who are pacing themselves just like I am. So here's to the small wins, the laughter, the applause, and even the simple recognition of progress. Let's raise a toast to the breadcrumbs that will guide our feet onward, because every step, no matter how small, is a step towards something greater. Chapter 11, The Impromptu Challenge, Speaking on the Spot Techniques for Quick Thinking. When I first set out to improve my quick thinking skills, I had little idea of the challenges that awaited me. Standing in front of a live audience can feel like the calm before a storm. The tension is palpable, and every second counts. I remember a particular speech I delivered on innovation. The nerves were churning in my stomach, but I felt prepared. That is, until someone in the back row suddenly raised their hand and asked a question I hadn't anticipated at all. My heart jumped in my chest, and for a fraction of a second, I panicked. What if I stutter, or worse, forget everything I've prepared? I took a deep breath and focused all my energy on listening. One technique I discovered to enhance my quick thinking is the power of active listening. Instead of formulating my response while the question was being asked, I trained myself to truly absorb the inquiry. I learned to nod, maintain eye contact, and even paraphrase the question in my mind. This helped me buy precious seconds to organize my thoughts, allowing the answer to flow more naturally. In that moment of uncertainty, I reminded myself that it was okay to take a moment and think. Silence can be just as powerful as words. That particular response transformed the audience's perception of my expertise. They appreciated the authenticity in my approach as much as the information I shared. But quick thinking isn't solely about responding to questions. I also faced unexpected technical difficulties during presentations. Once, while illustrating a complex concept with a PowerPoint slide, the projector inexplicably shut down. I stood there, dumbfounded, the room illuminated only by nervous chuckles and shifting bodies. Panic prickled at the edges of my mind, threatening to cloud my judgment. Instead of freezing, I took a deep breath and said, "Well, it seems our technology has decided to take a break." The room erupted in laughter, and I seized the moment to pivot. I began explaining the concept through a relatable story instead, eliminating reliance on visuals altogether. Over time, I honed my responses to unexpected situations by adopting a playful mindset. Now, when faced with the unknown, I ask myself, how can I make this engaging? Humor, humility, and spontaneity can diffuse tension, draw the audience in, and convert anxiety into relatability. Leveraging vulnerability helped me forge connections with my listeners. They saw that we were all in it together. Their attention focused not just on my words, but on shared experiences. I began to realize that each unexpected question or hiccup was an opportunity to engage more deeply. In preparing for future speeches, I started rehearsing potential curveballs by stage managing mock Q&A sessions with friends. "Give me the toughest questions you can," I would implore. Not only did this help me build resilience, but it also trained me to think on my feet. Every unexpected scenario shaped me into a more agile thinker, anchoring my confidence and ability to adapt, even in high-pressure situations. But just when I thought I had it all figured out, I stepped into an important event that would test everything I had learned. Embracing the unexpected, my personal stories. Life has a peculiar way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. That's how I ended up at a pottery class one dreary November afternoon. I had no intention of engaging in any creative outlet that day, the weather outside matching my mood, a dull gray blanket stretched across the sky. But my friend Linda insisted I join her. She promised it would be fun and so cathartic. I rolled my eyes, but something inside me whispered to embrace the unexpected. On my first try at molding clay, I was a clumsy mess, hands slipping, clay wobbling, laughter echoing around the studio. I remember the instructor, a spirited woman named Rosie, laughing as my effort resembled more of a pancake than a vase. Instead of crushing my spirit, her encouragement filled me with warmth. "It's all about the process," she cheered. It was an odd mixture of frustration and delight, but I began to feel a peculiar sense of freedom, as if the clay was not the only thing transforming in my hands. This experience taught me that embracing the unexpected not only opens doors to new skills, but can also lead to new friendships. Over the weeks that followed, I found myself returning to the class. Each session was an adventure, my confidence building alongside my ability to manipulate the clay into something recognizable. I met people from all walks of life. I listened to their stories and shared my own, learning that everyone has something unexpected to offer. It wasn't just the art of pottery that connected us, it was the willingness to be open to the unknown. But sometimes, embracing the unexpected can lead to far more significant consequences. The roller coaster of life, I discovered, doesn't always follow a thrilling but safe path. When my boss decided to restructure our department, fear coursed through me like ice water. Amid uncertainties surrounding job security, I dwelled on what I could lose rather than what I could gain. In those moments, I was reminded of my pottery lessons. Instead of panicking, I chose to mold my career trajectory creatively. I began networking, attending workshops, and seeking guidance from mentors. What initially seemed like a setback opened up a new path that I hadn't anticipated. I found new opportunities where I least expected them. The culmination of these experiences came when I was unexpectedly offered a chance to lead a project I had long admired from afar, an initiative I thought was out of my reach. Standing in front of my new team, I felt that familiar combination of excitement and fear wash over me. My heart thumped as I prepared to share my vision, remembering all I had learned through embracing the unexpected. I was no longer the clumsy novice at the pottery wheel. I was the creator, the leader steering the ship toward uncharted waters. The room buzzed with a palpable energy, and I realized that the unexpected can lead you to discover your own hidden strengths. As I write this, I know that life will continue to offer its surprises. Those moments of uncertainty can unearth incredible opportunities for growth, connection, and creativity. Embracing the unexpected has taught me that while I may not always predict what lies ahead, I can choose how to react to it. It's this realization that fills me with a warm confidence. So the next time an unexpected twist comes your way, remember it might just be the start of something wonderful. Let's mold it together into a masterpiece. The boost of confidence from spontaneity. Have you ever felt that jolt of electricity when you decide to do something spontaneous? It's a feeling unlike any other, an exhilarating mix of anxiety and thrill, as if you're stepping off the edge of a cliff into an unknown but promising adventure. Just the other day, I experienced this firsthand when I decided, on a whim, to take a road trip to a neighboring city. I hadn't packed anything. My only plan was to drive and see where the highway would take me. Yet, it turned out to be one of the most liberating experiences of my life. Not only did it reignite my sense of adventure, but it also reminded me how spontaneity can be a significant factor in boosting our confidence. As I drove past the familiar scenery and into a world of unexpected sights, I could feel my heart racing. Each passing mile was an embrace of the unknown, an exercise in trust, not just in the road ahead, but in myself. It's fascinating how spontaneity can challenge our usual routines and push us beyond our comfort zones. The impacts of this can be profound. Research suggests that stepping outside of our daily habits and making spontaneous choices can lead to increased feelings of control and self-efficacy. In other words, the more we allow ourselves to be spontaneous, the more we learn to trust our ability to handle whatever life throws at us. I arrived at my destination just around sunset, and the colors painted the sky in vibrant hues of orange and purple. Standing there, I felt a surge of pride wash over me. It wasn't just about having made the journey. It was the realization that I could do things on a whim and relish the outcomes. I wandered through the city, spoke to strangers, sampled local foods, and took photographs. The more I engaged with this spontaneous experience, the more confidence bubbled within me. What I once viewed as a daunting task, venturing out alone into a new place, had transformed into a source of empowerment. It's a reminder that stepping out of our routines can lead to moments of clarity and assurance. However, as night began to fall, I found myself facing a choice. Should I spend the night in this city or drive back home? The dilemma loomed over me like a thunderstorm, and just when I thought I had it all figured out, a few unexpected twists were about to unfold. Chapter 12: Persuasion Techniques. Captivating and influencing your audience. Understanding the principles of persuasion. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you desperately wanted to convince someone of your point of view, only to feel your words falling flat? I know I have. In my early days of presenting ideas, whether it was for a school project or a professional proposal, I would speak with passion only to be met with blank stares. That's when I started to understand the powerful concept of persuasion. The journey led me through a maze of psychology, social dynamics, and even a bit of art. My lessons began to crystallize around a set of principles that I've come to see as the backbone of effective persuasion. One of the most enlightening moments in this pursuit came during a workshop on public speaking. A seasoned speaker opened with a story that tugged at the audience's heartstrings. Suddenly, we were invested. This is a perfect illustration of the principle of reciprocity. People are more likely to respond positively to someone who gives them something first, be it information, a favor, or in this case, an emotional connection. By the time he unveiled his main point, we were not just listeners, we were allies in his cause. This experience elucidated a pivotal aspect of persuasion. It's not just about the arguments we present, but about the relationships we forge. Then there's the principle of scarcity. It's fascinating how the fear of missing out can drive a person's decision-making. During a campaign at work, I introduced a limited-time offer for our new service, and within days, we saw an astounding uptick in inquiries. The clock was ticking, and suddenly, our offering transformed from a mere option to a coveted opportunity. This isn't manipulation. It's an understanding of human psychology that, when applied ethically, can help guide choices in a meaningful direction. It became clear to me that effective persuasion is about alignment, aligning your message with the values, needs, and desires of your audience. Another pivotal lesson came from observing my children navigate their world. Their innate ability to appeal to emotion reminds me that ethos, pathos, and logos, the three pillars of persuasive argument, are not mere concepts, but tools we can wield consciously. My daughter, for instance, has a knack for storytelling that grips the listener's imagination, crafting a narrative that makes her request feel less like a demand and more like a shared journey. I learned from her that by using emotion to connect, we create bonds that lead to trust, a foundational element in persuasion. But even with these insights, I still grappled with a personal dilemma. I needed to persuade my colleagues about a project I was passionate about, but feared they would dismiss it outright. After extensive research, I discovered the principle of consensus. I realized that people are more inclined to agree with a perspective that others support. I conducted informal discussions leading up to the presentation, gauging opinions and generating excitement. By the time I pitched my ideas, I wasn't just presenting my vision. I was framing it as a collective initiative, a movement we could all rally behind. The approval we achieved not only filled me with joy, but solidified my beliefs about the power of persuasion in a collaborative environment. Yet, as I reflect on these experiences, I recognize that persuasion is not a one-size-fits-all approach. Some days it's straightforward, other days it's like navigating a minefield. One such occasion brought this to light during a heated meeting where my proposal seemed to instigate resistance. I felt the tension swelling as objections flew across the table like projectiles. It was in this moment that I realized the importance of adaptability. Instead of pushing my agenda, I paused, listened, and adjusted my strategy in real time. This led to a discussion where even the most resistant team members contributed, transforming an adversarial atmosphere into a collaborative one. The principle of listening, of being open to feedback, turned the tide. As I continue to delve into the principles of persuasion, I find myself not just wanting to persuade others, but also to inspire them. The urgency I felt in those last moments of that meeting still lingers with me. It's the thirst for understanding, for connection, that drives effective persuasion. Each principle offers a pathway, but ultimately, it's the genuine human connection that binds it all together, fostering not just agreement, but shared vision. Building credibility and trust. When I first started my career, I was often met with skepticism. It wasn't that I lacked knowledge or skills, but rather I stood on the precipice of a world dominated by seasoned professionals. I soon realized that to make any headway, I had to earn the respect and trust of those around me. It wasn't just about showing what I could do. It was about showing who I was and building relationships grounded in authenticity. One of the most pivotal moments for me was during a project where I was assigned to lead a team of veterans much older and more experienced than I was. My initial instinct was to dive right into the technical details and dictate the direction. Yet, I quickly learned that my approach had to be different. It became evident that credibility stemmed not just from knowledge, but from my willingness to listen. I took the time to acknowledge their vast experiences, inviting each member to share their thoughts before pitching any ideas of my own. That simple act of vulnerability opened doors, and trust began to blossom. Creating a culture of transparency and openness built the foundation for our collaboration. There were moments when things went awry, deadlines were missed, and frustrations flared. However, I always prioritized honesty, admitting when I didn't have the answers, and showing that I was willing to learn. During challenging times, I started holding weekly check-ins, where we could openly discuss not just project updates, but the challenges we faced. It allowed us to see each other as human, rather than just roles in a project. Gradually, this candor fostered an environment where ideas flowed freely and trust expanded like ripples on water. But just when I thought everything was on track, a sudden clash of egos threatened to derail the progress we had made. A new team member joined, eager to showcase their capability, but overlooking the established dynamics. Tensions rose, and where there had once been camaraderie, anxiety filled the air. It was a glaring reminder that building trust is an ongoing journey, not a destination. I had to step in, facilitating dialogues that not only addressed disputes, but also reinforced our common goal. In a tense meeting filled with clenched jaws and crossed arms, I witnessed the fissures of distrust begin to heal as we tackled concerns head-on, reinforcing our commitment to one another. As I look back, those interactions were formative in not only shaping my leadership style, but also reinforcing the truth behind credibility. It isn't just built in moments of triumph, but also in how we navigate through conflicts and uncertainties. Establishing credibility in any relationship requires consistent effort and a deep respect for the journey we undertake together. I often remind myself that every conversation has the power to either build bridges or put walls up. And as I sit here reflecting, I realize it's the conscious choices we make in those moments that define our paths towards enduring trust. Crafting a compelling call to action. As I sat in my cluttered office, the faint smell of burnt coffee wafting through the air, I realized I had been staring at my screen for far too long. My latest article was almost complete, yet I felt an unsettling void where my call to action should be. You know that feeling, right? It's like leaving the last piece of your puzzle missing, and it's driving you mad. I took a deep breath and thought back to the times I had been inspired by a well-crafted call to action. Those moments when someone's words made me leap from my seat, eager to chase a dream or join a cause. What was it about those crucial lines that struck a chord with me? That's what I needed to figure out. There I was, a self-proclaimed wordsmith, yet grappling with the very essence of persuasion. I understood the components: clarity, urgency, and emotional resonance. But quantifying those elements into a powerful call to action, that was the challenge. I penned down the basics. Join now, or don't miss out. Sure, they were direct, but did they inspire? Did they invite engagement or merely demand attention? I sifted through memories, drawing on experiences where my heartbeat quickened because someone had urged me to act. It dawned on me that crafting a compelling call to action wasn't just about shouting louder. It was about connecting deeper. As I mused, a wave of inspiration washed over me, and I began to scribble fervently. I envisioned my readers, their dreams, their struggles, their desires. I created a scenario where I invoked a sense of urgency, like a ticking clock reminding them that opportunities are fleeting. Imagine not reaching your dreams simply because you hesitated, I wrote, adding a bit of the emotional punch that had compelled me in the seminar. I folded in elements of storytelling, crafting a mini narrative right within that call to action that beckoned them to step beyond the bounds of their comfort zones. But I needed to wrap it all up. I understood storytelling was only one piece of the puzzle. I had learned that an effective call to action must also hold its ground. I tested my words, pacing in my cramped office, turning them over in my mind. I sought feedback from friends, and as they read my call to action, I watched their faces light up and their brows furrow in concentration. I felt the tension in the air, the electricity buzz as they declared various thoughts stitched together with my words, but I knew I still wasn't done. I needed to know whether my call to action would slice through the noise, beckoning others to join my cause. As I hit send on my draft, I felt a mixture of excitement and fear, but mostly, I felt alive. That unmistakable thrill of laying something bare, of inviting others into a world fueled by passion and urgency. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. I had crafted more than just words. I'd crafted a bridge for connection. All that was left was to see if those distant voices would respond and whether they too would feel that push, that invigorating nudge to act. Chapter 13, The Power of Storytelling, Making a Lasting Impression. Identifying relatable stories. The journey to understanding the power of relatable stories often starts with a simple truth. We all crave connection. I remember sitting in a crowded cafe, earbuds in, surrounded by snippets of conversation. Laughter bubbled over from a nearby table where friends reminisced about a summer road trip gone awry. Their shared tales transcended the ordinary, stitching tight the fabric of their companionship. It struck me then, stories are more than mere entertainment. They are paths to empathy and understanding, bridges connecting disparate experiences. Now, let's reflect on your own experience. Think of a moment that left an imprint on your heart. Maybe it was that time you stumbled through a pivotal conversation, or perhaps a bittersweet goodbye resonated deeply within you. When we scrutinize our encounters, we realize that even the smallest slice of life can be an entry point for others. The key lies in peeling back layers of emotion, revealing universal themes like love, loss, struggle, and triumph embedded within our personal narratives. Through my exploration of storytelling, I stumbled across an invaluable technique, the art of framing. This isn't about crafting a grand plot, but about presenting a moment that stirs up feelings that anyone can relate to. For instance, consider the story of a misplaced item. which on the surface may seem trivial, yet beneath that surface lies anxiety, nostalgia, and the lingering question of what if. It is these layers that make a story memorable and relatable, resonating with the listener's own experiences, reminding them of their own moments of loss or discovery. But let's not stop at feelings. What about practical application? Imagine being at a dinner party where the conversation lulls. Instead of diving into the latest news or avoiding the awkward silence, share a recent anecdote about the time you attempted a simple recipe that turned into an ambitious disaster. As laughter erupts and others chime in with their cooking misadventures, a warm and lively atmosphere blossoms. That's the magic of relatable stories. They open doors, invite vulnerability, and create an environment where everyone can share and bond. As I navigated my own adventures in storytelling, I noticed an unsettling trend. Numerous self-proclaimed storytellers seemed to miss the mark, spinning intricate tales about lives that felt unfathomable and grand, lifetimes spent in endeavors few could genuinely grasp. While those stories hold value, they run the risk of alienating the audience. A crucial practice emerged from this observation: authenticity. Authentic stories, grounded in real emotions and everyday experiences, have an uncanny ability to resonate with others. As I shared my newfound insights, I felt more emboldened to dig into my past, drawing on what made my experiences tangible and compelling. I discovered that every instance of vulnerability shone brighter in the light of connection. Consider sharing that time you faced a seemingly insurmountable challenge and emerged fragile yet victorious. The raw, unfiltered emotions will lay bare not just your story, but the collective human experience, reminding everyone that they too are a part of this tapestry of existence. But then again, as you practice this art, the question looms larger. Where do you draw the line between personal narrative and universal appeal? Building towards that essence of relatability invites both an exhilarating and daunting task. Every story you tell shapes a relationship, a fractured one at that, if you aren't careful. I learned that you must strike a balance between sharing your truth and ensuring that those listening can see themselves reflected in your words. The tension builds when you realize that with every anecdote you share, there is the weight of expectation. Will they laugh? Will they empathize? Will they connect? And ultimately, will you be brave enough to share deeper truths if the moment calls for it? Thus, we find ourselves wandering through the intricate maze of narrative, an exploration that brings us to the edge of vulnerability. It is here that tension peaks, and I invite you to reflect. As you sift through your stories, what do you hope to illuminate for your audience? Is it simply entertainment, or is it a deeper desire to forge bonds? It's a question that stirs excitement, yet instills apprehension. The path to connection is fraught with uncertainty, but remember, it is within that uncertainty that the most transformative stories often lie, waiting patiently to be told. Weaving narratives into your speech. Every time I stand in front of an audience, I feel an exhilarating mix of adrenaline and vulnerability. It's like walking a tightrope. One misstep, and I could lose my audience, or worse, my message. But there's a secret that comforts me, a technique that transforms my words from mere information into engaging narratives that resonate with listeners. The power of storytelling isn't just a gimmick, it's a fundamental part of human communication. Each time I share a personal anecdote, I can see eyes light up, nods of understanding ripple through the crowd, and even the occasional chuckle bubbling up unexpectedly. At that moment, I know I'm no longer just talking, I'm connecting. Imagine speaking about the challenges of teamwork in the workplace. Instead of launching into facts and statistics, I dive into a narrative about a time my team faced a seemingly insurmountable obstacle. I recount how we pooled our ideas, met after hours to brainstorm, and even indulged in a bit of friendly competition to come up with solutions. The energy shifts. Laughter emerges when I describe my colleagues' flamboyant but ultimately disastrous idea of using paper airplanes to share documents across the office. Through storytelling, I am not merely delivering a speech. I am crafting an experience that brings everyone along for the ride. The most effective narratives are anchored in authenticity. When I speak from my heart, my words resonate deeper. I remember the time I nervously presented my first speech to a group of seasoned professionals. As I stood there, trembling and fumbling, I shared my story of that very moment, how I felt like an imposter in a room full of experts. By admitting my vulnerability, I found common ground with my audience. They, too, had faced similar fears. That shared moment forged an invisible bond that made my words linger long after I sat down. But weaving these narratives is not without its challenges. How do we ensure our stories align seamlessly with our message? How do we maintain focus without veering into irrelevant tangents? As I explored the art of storytelling, I discovered the power of framework. Just like a good plot, every story has a beginning, middle, and end. When I craft my messages, I outline my key points first, ensuring that the stories I weave ultimately serve to reinforce them. This became immensely useful during one presentation on the importance of resilience. By sharing the story of my mentor who overcame significant setbacks to achieve success, I illustrated the theme of perseverance while grounding my message in real life. It was compelling, it was relatable, and most importantly, it was effective. The excitement builds as I see my audience leaning in, hungry for more, their eyes glued, hanging on every word. Yet, even as I pour my heart into these stories, I remain acutely aware of time encapsulated in each presentation. Juggling brevity and depth can feel like an impossible task, especially when a riveting story tugs at my sleeves, urging to be told. In those moments, I remind myself that a well-placed summary or a clever metaphor can convey profound insights without complete narratives. It's an art, learning when to stop the story and pivot back to my core message. One morning, deep in preparation for a speech, I felt torn between relaying a gripping tale of failure and the need to highlight lessons learned in my field. As the date approached, tension mounted. Would my narrative resonate, or would it fall flat? Would I strike the balance between relatability and authority, or would I lose the audience in a sea of details? Standing backstage, I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, reminding myself that every story is an opportunity for connection. And, as I stepped out into the spotlight, the fear melted away, replaced by the confidence that together we would navigate this journey of words, one evocative story at a time. But would all my preparation be enough? Would the story that tugged so fiercely at my heart land as I envisioned it? My heart raced as I faced the crowd, an electric energy swirling in the air. My story was about to unfold, but would it end the way I hoped? Emotional resonance, connect and inspire. Have you ever found yourself in a conversation where the other person seemed to truly understand you? It's a feeling like no other, one that sends ripples through our hearts and minds. I still remember the time my mentor Maria sat with me in a quaint cafe, her eyes locked onto mine as I spilled my fears about failing in my new job. She didn't just listen, she resonated. Her stories, laced with vulnerability and strength, illuminated my own insecurities. That connection, that surge of empathy, made all the difference. Emotional resonance is not just a fleeting moment, it's a powerful tool for connecting with others. When we share our stories, our struggles, and our triumphs authentically, we invite others to do the same. Think of it this way. Every time we choose to be vulnerable, we create a bridge. Consider how often you felt moved by someone's narrative, whether it's a friend's battle with health issues or a stranger's tale of redemption. The emotions expressed can echo through our own experiences, reminding us that we are never alone in our feelings. But how do we cultivate this emotional resonance? It starts with active listening. Really paying attention to others, not just waiting for your turn to speak, can deepen the bond you share. Ask open-ended questions and share your insights. When I began practicing this, the world around me transformed. In meetings, instead of merely presenting my ideas, I listened to my colleagues' thoughts and emotions, weaving their perspectives into my contributions. The result? A collaborative spirit that inspired innovation and camaraderie. However, it's worth noting that emotional resonance comes with responsibility. We must handle others' emotions delicately. The balance of sharing oneself while respecting others' stories is crucial. Despite the beauty of this connection, there are times when I feel hesitant, moments when vulnerability feels too risky. I recall a recent workshop I led where I was supposed to discuss the struggles of being a writer. Just as I was ready to dive deep into my personal narrative, self-doubt crept in. What if they think I'm foolish? What if my struggles seemed trivial? But then I remembered the power of honesty. When I shared a particularly challenging rejection email, it wasn't just my story. It resonated with many who had faced similar setbacks. The atmosphere shifted, laughter mingled with nods of understanding, and suddenly we were all in this together. As I left the workshop that day, I felt invigorated, reminded that sharing our messy, imperfect lives can inspire others. It's a ripple effect, spreading warmth and connection. The human experience weaves us together, reminding us that emotional resonance isn't merely about sharing stories, it's about making an impact. The question then becomes, what legacy do we wish to leave? It's a profound responsibility, yet an exhilarating challenge. At this moment, I invite you to reflect. When was the last time you felt that spark of connection? When did you inspire someone through your authentic self? Our lives are rich tapestries, and every thread we add can illuminate another's journey. Let's be the catalysts for emotional resonance, bridging gaps between strangers and friends alike. Each shared story, each moment of vulnerability, can become a beacon of hope for someone who feels lost. Will you step into that role? Chapter 14. The journey continues, evolving as a speaker, setting new goals for growth. It was a crisp January morning, the kind that welcomes new beginnings with open arms. The warmth of my favorite coffee mug, cradled in my hands, acted as a stark contrast to the chill outside. I looked out the window, watching as each flake of light snow gently danced down to join its siblings on the ground. It felt oddly symbolic. The fresh layer of snow blanketed the imperfections of yesterday, inviting thoughts of what could be. I took a deep breath, savoring the moment, and began to reflect on my journey. The past years had been a mix of triumphs and struggles, and it was time to set new goals that would propel me forward. In the world of personal growth, setting goals is much more than just jotting down what we think we want. It is about creating a roadmap that aligns with our values and desires. I've found that the most effective goals are those that resonate deeply with who we are. I remember the year I decided to run my first marathon. It wasn't simply about crossing the finish line. It was about proving to myself that I could break through physical and mental barriers. I reflected on how each small training run accumulated into a powerful momentum that not only transformed my physical strength, but also ignited a fierce sense of determination within me. Before diving into this goal-setting frenzy, I learned that it's crucial to cultivate awareness. I spent time journaling, listing what I truly wanted and what I was willing to work for. Was it a promotion at work, a healthier lifestyle, or perhaps learning a new skill? Taking a moment for introspection can unveil the underlying motivations that drive us. It was during one of these reflective moments that I realized I was driven by a desire for freedom, not just in my career, but in my life, to master my craft enough to create on my own terms. With that clarity, goal setting became a series of steps toward a bigger picture. But then came the question, how do I set these goals in a way that would ensure progress? I discovered the SMART framework, making sure my goals were specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Each element provided a sturdy base for my ambitions. I recalled when I decided to improve my cooking skills. Instead of aiming to cook better, I set a goal to master one new recipe a week for 6 months. It was specific, easy to measure, and fitting into my life with relative ease. And at the end of 6 months, what began as a simple experiment grew into a passion, often inviting friends over to share the fruits of my labor. As weeks passed and the snow melted, turning to spring with its hint of possibility, my goals shifted. I envisioned a garden, but not just any garden, one that represented growth in all aspects of my life. I wanted to nurture each plant, each goal, mindfully choosing what seeds to sow. Some days were daunting, filled with doubt that tried to take root in my mind. But the beauty of growth is often hidden in those challenges. I wished to inspire others to join me on this quest for fulfillment, encouraging them to plant their own seeds while cultivating their inner strength. But despite the sunlight shining down, casting hope across my ambitions, an unexpected cloud loomed on the horizon, threatening to overshadow my careful planning. As the end of the season approached, I faced a dilemma that would test my resolve. My job, once a steady anchor, began to feel stifling, a pivotal point that could either nourish my growth or cause it to wither. The idea of stepping away to chase my dreams sent shivers down my spine. Was it time to take a leap into the unknown? Would pursuing my passion finally give me that freedom I yearned for, or would it lead to a fall? The tension was palpable, and I had to choose whether to remain in the safety of the familiar or risk everything for a chance at true growth. Joining speaking communities and networks. When I first dipped my toes into the world of public speaking, I felt like a lost child in a gigantic amusement park, excited yet bewildered. That's when a friend recommended that I join speaking communities and networks. You should connect with others who are just as terrified and passionate as you are, they said. At the time, I didn't fully grasp the weight of their advice. Looking back, I realized that these gatherings weren't just about finding resources. They were lifelines in a sea of anxiety, each member a buoy floating toward my goals. As I navigated my initial forays into these communities, the first meeting I attended was a mix of nerves and anticipation. I walked into a local Toastmasters session. The room was filled with people who seemed like they had mastered the stage. Their confidence radiated, and I couldn't help but wonder, will I ever get there? But instead of feeling intimidated, I listened, really listened to their stories, and each tale was tinged with vulnerability, echoing the very fears I harbored. I realized that these individuals were not born speakers. They were simply people who had decided to embark on a journey. And here I was, standing at the starting line. Through my engagement with various networks, I not only honed my skills, but uncovered something unexpected, a community of support. Networking wasn't simply about sharing tips on engagement tactics or perfecting our elevator pitches. It became about mutual growth, encouragement, and the understanding that we were all in this together. I still vividly remember the day Angela, a polished speaker who had been in the game for years, came to me after my presentation and shared her first-time horror story. I tripped on the mic cord and fell flat on my face in front of an audience, she confessed, eyes sparkling with mirth. In that moment, I could see how she had transformed that awkward stumble into a powerful narrative that enriched her delivery. As I continued to immerse myself in these communities, the camaraderie blossomed into friendships. We became sounding boards for one another's fears, but as we confronted our vulnerabilities together, we discovered a shared motivation that propelled us forward. Each workshop, each discussion, and even our casual meetups became platforms for growth. I could feel my own confidence inching up, like the barometer rising before a storm. Yet, if there's one thing I hadn't anticipated, it was the growing understanding of how vital these connections would be when the stakes escalated. It was during one particularly intense meeting that I heard about an upcoming speaking competition. The idea struck like a bolt of lightning, electrifying and terrifying. It was a challenge, but not just any challenge, a chance to showcase what I had learned, the person I was becoming, and the support network that had nurtured me. But as I contemplated the opportunity, doubt crept in like a fog around me. Would I disappoint everyone? What if I stumbled? I glanced at the faces of my friends, their intrigue and encouragement igniting something fierce within me. I knew then that stepping into this arena would not only serve to test my skills, but also affirm the community that had lifted me up. As I prepared for that competition, each late-night practice session merged my fears and aspirations into a palpable energy that almost buzzed. My friends from the speaking community rallied around me, providing feedback that sharpened my message and reinforced my confidence. Yet, as the day approached, that fear returned to haunt me. What if I didn't succeed? As I stood backstage, listening to the applause for others, I found myself at the precipice of a realization. Speaking wasn't merely about individual triumph. It was about amplifying voices, narrating experiences, and engaging in a profound dialogue with the audience. And then, as my name was called and I stepped onto the stage, I understood. I glanced at the audience, my fellow speakers, my mentors, and the inseparable bonds we had forged, and suddenly the nerves faded away. At that moment, I became part of something larger, a network of stories intertwined, sharing not just the spotlight, but the journey. And with every word I delivered, I knew one undeniable truth. Communities and networks turn the solitary journey of self-improvement into a collective exploration of what it means to connect, inspire, and grow together. The lifelong learning mindset. The first time I heard the term lifelong learning mindset, I was sitting in a cramped coffee shop, the scent of roasted beans surrounding me like a comforting blanket. I had just finished reading an article that seemed to spark a fire in my mind. I imagined what it would be like to embrace learning as an endless journey, a path that would help me continually grow instead of a destination to reach. The article spoke of how in our fast-paced world, knowledge is like a flowing river. If we don't keep swimming, we risk being swept away by the current. It struck me with an undeniable truth. If I wanted to keep up, I had to change my approach to learning. I remembered a time in my life, not too long ago, when I had become stagnant. I worked a typical 9-to-5 job, coming home exhausted, binge-watching the latest shows instead of engaging my mind. I was living on autopilot, and somewhere along the way, I lost the spark that came with curiosity. It wasn't until a friend invited me to a local workshop on creative writing that I felt the stirrings of excitement again. The moment I picked up a pen and let my thoughts flow onto the paper, I knew that I was ready to embrace the world of learning with open arms. One evening, a few months after that enlightening workshop, I found myself attending a lecture on blockchain technology. I knew almost nothing about this subject, but I was intrigued. As the speaker delved into the complexities and potential of decentralized finance, I felt my mind expanding. I realized then that the more we learn, the more avenues open up for us in our personal and professional lives. The possibilities are endless if only we actively seek them out. However, embracing this mindset is not without its challenges. There are days when I feel overwhelmed by the information available at my fingertips. The sheer volume can be paralyzing. I recall one night as I stared at my computer, juggling 3 tabs open, one for online courses, another for articles on mindfulness, and yet another for tools on coding. My mind buzzed with excitement, but also trepidation. How would I ever manage not just to learn, but to retain all this information? That's when the potential for a shift in my journey came to life. I learned the importance of setting boundaries for myself. Instead of trying to absorb everything at once, I began to focus on one subject at a time. I started small, 1 book a month, 1 course every 3 months. As I explored each topic, I allowed myself to dive deep, asking questions, joining discussions, and, importantly, reflecting on what I learned. I created a habit of journaling about my experiences, which transformed my understanding into personal insights. This became my anchor in the turbulent sea of information and ensured that I didn't just float, but felt more grounded. The most incredible revelation was that the connections I made along the way were just as rich as the knowledge itself. I stumbled across groups of like-minded individuals who were equally passionate about learning. We exchanged ideas, supported each other when motivation waned, and celebrated milestones, big and small. An accomplishment, such as completing a chapter in a challenging book or finishing a difficult project, became less about the end product and more about the collective joy and growth we all experienced together. But then came the moment that nearly derailed everything I had been building. About a year into embracing my new mindset, I was faced with a crossroads. A new job opportunity landed in my lap, one that promised to be a leap in my career, but also required a considerable commitment, demanding long hours with little time for personal projects. I felt torn. Should I prioritize this path, leaving my quest for knowledge on hold, or balance both worlds? Doubts crept in as I weighed my options, each scenario seeming to overshadow the other. This pivotal moment challenged everything I had learned so far. Could I really maintain this newfound passion for lifelong learning? Chapter 15, Giving Back, Teaching Others to Speak Confidently, Creating Workshops, Sharing My Knowledge. It all started with a simple idea. I wanted to share the knowledge I'd accumulated over the years. I remember sitting in my cluttered office, surrounded by books and notes, when the thought struck me. Could I turn my passion for teaching into something tangible, something that would benefit not only me, but others as well? The concept of workshops was just floating around my mind, like a shimmering bubble waiting to be popped. I knew that if I truly wanted to make an impact, I had to take the leap. As I began crafting my first workshop, A mix of excitement and nerves washed over me. What would I teach? How would I engage my audience? I recalled the seminars I had attended, the vibrant discussions that sparked my creativity, and the moments when knowledge truly flowed like a river between the speaker and the audience. I envisioned a warm, inviting room where people would not just sit and listen, but interact, explore, and discover together. It was essential for me to create an environment where they felt safe to ask questions and share their own experiences. The research was intense but rewarding. I scoured articles, watched videos of great educators, and read countless books on effective teaching strategies. I learned that workshops should not be mere lectures. They should be interactive experiences that cater to various learning styles. I decided to incorporate breakout sessions, hands-on activities, and even a Q&A segment to ensure the attendees felt engaged and valued. My heart raced with the thrill of putting my newfound knowledge into practice. Fast forward to the day of my first workshop. I stood at the front of the room, the scent of fresh coffee wafting through the air. My notes were neatly stacked on the table, yet what consumed my thoughts was a gnawing anxiety. What if no one showed up? What if I failed to connect with my audience? But as people began to filter in, smiling and greeting one another, my nerves slowly dissipated. I welcomed everyone with open arms, feeling the warmth of their energy feed my enthusiasm. As I dove into the material, I watched the participants come alive. They shared their own stories, and with each passing minute, the initial awkwardness transformed into a vibrant exchange of ideas. Laughter echoed in the room, and I knew that this was more than just a workshop. It had become a community of learners. I guided them through exercises and discussions, all designed to enhance their understanding and spark creativity. Together, we explored new concepts and delved into practical applications. But then, just as I was about to wrap up, a young woman raised her hand with an earnest expression. What if we're stuck in our current jobs and can't see a way out? Her words hung in the air, heavy with concern. The atmosphere shifted. A palpable tension filled the room. I could feel the collective breath hold. Everyone was silent, waiting for a response. In that moment, I realized that workshops are not just about imparting knowledge, but also about addressing the pulse of reality. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, a chance to engage my audience on a deeper level. As I opened my mouth to respond, my mind raced, grappling with the weight of her question. My heart raced as I considered the various paths people take in their careers and the fears that often accompany them. How could I provide the reassurance they needed? I felt the tension rise, transforming my exhilaration into a rush of vulnerability. In my gut, I knew this conversation would shape the rest of the workshop and possibly my approach to teaching going forward. With every ounce of authenticity I could muster, I shared my own story of struggle, how I once felt trapped in a job that soured my spirit. I spoke about the small steps I took to discover my passion for teaching and how everyone possesses the potential to carve their own path, albeit one small action at a time. The intensity of the moment hung like a fragile thread, ready to snap or strengthen the connection we were forging. I could see the relief and understanding wash over her face, and I knew then that this was why I created workshops in the first place. Not just to teach, but to connect and inspire. Mentoring others on their journey. There's a quiet joy that saturates my mornings as I sip my coffee, pondering the stories that intertwine our lives. Just the other day, I found myself reflecting on the time I mentored a young woman named Sarah. Her ambition was palpable, yet she often struggled with self-doubt. I remember sitting across from her, the sunlight streaming through the cafe window, illuminating her determined expression. We began with simple conversations about her aspirations, and each session turned into a fertile ground for growth. I often tell mentees that mentorship is not merely about offering advice. It's about sharing experiences, fostering trust, and cultivating resilience. I recall a particular week when Sarah faced a daunting challenge at work. She was up for a promotion and felt overwhelmed. I could see the hesitation gripping her as we discussed her fears, and it struck me just how many layers existed beneath her surface. I shared my own stories of professional growth, including times when I faltered and had to pick myself back up. Through my own trials, I hope to teach her that failure is not the end, it's an unexpected teacher. As our conversations deepened, I introduced her to the concept of the growth mindset, a philosophy I found influential in my own journey. It fascinated me how this simple shift in perspective could transform her approach to challenges. We practiced together, preparing for tough conversations she would face, and I watched as her confidence began to bloom. Yet, as inspiring as Sarah's progression was, I felt an unease brewing beneath the surface. What if my experiences didn't resonate with her? What if I inadvertently led her astray? The weight of responsibility in mentoring began to take its toll, and I wondered if I was truly equipped for this role. Then came the pivotal moment. One evening, Sarah phoned me, her voice trembling through the line. "I have to present my ideas to the board tomorrow," she admitted. "I'm terrified. What if they don't like what I've prepared?" As I listened, my heart raced. This wasn't just a routine challenge. It was a make-or-break situation for her. I could hear the stakes rising. You see, mentoring isn't just about guiding through the easy times. It's about being present during the storms. In that moment, I knew I needed to be more than a mentor. I had to be a pillar of strength. I urged her to focus not on the outcome, but on the process. "Remember, you're not just presenting ideas, you're sharing a part of yourself," I reminded her, voice steady, despite my own anxieties. "Own it." In my mind, I could picture the boardroom, the bright lights, and Sarah standing at the forefront, ready to take her place. That night, I barely slept, tossing and turning in bed as I made mental notes of everything I had shared with her. I felt the echoes of responsibility. Had I armed her with enough? What if the words I offered weren't enough to shield her from potential disappointment? It was a tangible tension, one that seemed to seep into every corner of my thoughts. Morning arrived with a bittersweet edge, the dawn light less comforting and more like a harbinger of uncertainty. When Sarah called afterward, her voice was shaky but sparkled with excitement. She had not only made her presentation, but had captivated the board with her passion. "They loved it," she exclaimed. I breathed a sigh of relief, allowing a wave of gratitude to wash over me. Her success was a triumph we would share. As we continued our sessions, I realized that mentoring is a two-way street, where both mentor and mentee forge resilience together. Empowering someone on their journey doesn't just transform them, it transforms you too. In those moments of vulnerability, we cultivate a bond deeper than mere guidance. It becomes mutual support and growth. As I reflected on Sarah's journey, I recognized the profound truth that the lessons of mentorship ripple outward, carrying the weight of each shared experience, inspiring others in ways we may never fully comprehend. And perhaps that realization is the greatest reward of all: the impact of community in public speaking. When I first stepped onto the stage at a local community event, my heart raced as if it were a marathon runner sprinting for the finish line. The glaring lights and anxious faces had a way of amplifying my nerves, but what surprised me most was the presence of my community gathered in that small auditorium. Their energy enveloped me like a warm blanket, igniting a flicker of confidence I didn't know I possessed. In that moment, I understood the profound truth. Public speaking isn't just about the speaker, it's a shared experience, shaped significantly by the audience and the community surrounding us. Community plays a vital role in public speaking, transforming what could be a solitary act into a collective journey. It provides a support system that can uplift a speaker during those moments of self-doubt. I remember a particularly nerve-wracking presentation where my mind went blank halfway through. However, seeing familiar faces in the crowd nodding and smiling gave me the reassurance I needed. It was like a gentle nudge, a reminder that I wasn't alone. This is the power of community. It cultivates a space of encouragement and understanding where speakers can thrive. Moreover, the impact of community in public speaking extends beyond the immediate support it provides. The diverse perspectives within a community enrich the content of our speeches. As I interacted with people from varied backgrounds while preparing my talks, I gathered different insights and experiences that informed my message. By engaging with my community, I was not only speaking for myself, but also for those whose voices often go unheard. This sense of responsibility to authentically represent my community instilled a deeper meaning to my words. making each speech feel like a shared narrative rather than a solo performance. Yet, as I continued to embrace the power of community, I encountered a dilemma. What happens when the community's voice becomes a cacophony, drowning out individual expression? During one of my presentations, I was overwhelmed by differing opinions from audience members on critical issues I was addressing. They wanted a representative voice, but as the discussion spiraled, it became clear that some perspectives were more vocal than others. As I navigated these murky waters, I realized this tension was part of a greater dialogue. It was a stark reminder that the community could be both a vessel for support and a potential source of discord. How could I balance honoring the voices of the community while staying true to my message? The tension built, yet it offered an exhilarating kind of challenge. I learned that addressing opposing views head-on during my talks could foster a space for healthy discourse, as long as I approached it with grace and empathy. In realizing that the community isn't a monolith, but rather a tapestry of varied experiences, I found my voice becoming more nuanced. Each speech became an opportunity not just to speak, but to engage, listen, and connect. In my journey as a public speaker, the community has shaped not only my message, but also my approach. Each experience taught me that connection is key. When we share our stories, we weave a tapestry of experiences that not only resonate but inspire. Fellow speakers, remember that stepping onto a stage is not merely about showcasing your skills. It's about building relationships with your community so that together we turn our vulnerability into strength. As I reflect on these moments, I understand that the impact of community in public speaking is immeasurable. It compels us to step out of our comfort zones, amplifies our voices, and fosters deeper connections. We all have something to share, and by embracing our communities, we become more than just speakers. We become storytellers, advocates, and allies. So as I prepare to step onto new stages in the future, I carry with me the warmth, wisdom, and strength of my community, knowing that we are all interconnected in this beautiful narrative of life. As we wrap up Public Speaking Confidence, Techniques to Speak with Impact, remember that the journey to becoming a confident speaker is ongoing. With each speech, you'll grow, learn, and become more effective in delivering your message. Keep practicing, seek feedback, and embrace every opportunity to speak publicly. Your voice has the power to inspire, influence, and make a difference. Stay confident, stay engaged, and keep speaking. Thank you for joining us on this journey.